Hi, Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Michael, can you hear us?
Yep, loud and clear. Thank you.
He's muted though. He went on.
Michael, can you try talking again?
Yeah, can you hear me now? It looks like it's working on my end.
That was like, that's like a 2-minute delay.
What's wrong with the technology? Oh. I think you're having technical difficulty. Oh. Audio from our panel.
Yeah. I even charged my cell phone and thought that I never did that. You know, they've been doing all that stuff with road.
Hello. Michael. Michael. Hey, we can check it. So. You can have to log that in. Not Zoom, no. No. Let's see. All right. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Hello?
Usually at the other end of the mouth.
Hello?
Go back up.
Hello?
Is this just impacting, study fees? Is there anything to prevent?
Hello? I can barely hear you. Can you hear me? That's pretty weird.
Get them on my computer, but just not on the system. Mayor, would you, the first item on the work section is just staff, it doesn't involve any of the panelists. Just in the interest of time, we want to start with that and then let the kids go find the work done. You're all good with that. Okay. You're all good.
What happens if you don't do anything? So we don't know it in July of 2020. Since that time, she has paid 3 county associates and visited the city hall and the staff. She's read numerous requests for proposals, some of which is used, for instance, the compensation studies or putting it to the deputy fire chief, deputy city manager and fire chief. And then also the proposal from the he also has written down his people, like what makes the RFP, like COVID testing and that is potentially on the and RFP to provide. He's also learned from many experience in people that are talking about during the budget work cycle. And has assisted other counties in their things, including vehicle purchases and a reduced device to start and the budget. You may not know it, the behind the scenes that we have been negotiating prices for all of these. With that, I'll go into the notes to cover the purchase. There. So the purchase policy was revised that year. In the last meeting. So the identified as a strategic goal, and a big time, and we'll do previously, it will standardize the process. The text that you're looking for, the print part program is really good. So it's a lot of work to do. And I want to thank a lot of resources that we do to the project. Before you can have organization, in the department meetings. We have to have engagement. We have to work forward with their flexibility and the understanding that we not never in line with the rest of the department. And very collaborative in the library. Also utilize the federal city data and reach out to a numerous phone calls with their individual Understand how they are. And have the seven years of service that have no. The first part of that is not the legal party. So today, you have one set of, bill threshold, and what we're suggesting moving forward is to have a set of the threshold for hundred versus some regular purchases. And the first order requirement is going to increase from 30,000. This is
The only folks that we have, sound.
Okay, so, go ahead. My one question I have, and that's a significant change in the local authority. How would they announce?
Look at the variable daily on level to in general, you will see I do not comparable daily with the topic. It was very inconsistent with it comes to the things on how they were doing. So, if you take into consideration that I think this is that we need to apply to the opposite for example, if you're going to buy, you want to get a vehicle purchase and it's $4,000, you might not have time to wait. So those are the types of things you take into consideration. Also, we had this from our city that having a special for marketing versus unmarketed purchases. You know, one of the things we mentioned that wanted to was that we are going to use the. Anything else?
Because, so with the recommended changes to the local authorities, one of the things that so if any one of the approvals, an individual approval act, let's say city manager needs to approve something that is at $50,000 or $100,000, if that exceeds the budgeted line, is there additional authority that needs to be granted for that, or is this with or without reservation relative to the budgeted line?
We could talk about, so it was. How we clarify, or we even clarify the difference between a person that it seems really talking about that a person that is being the money.
Yes, yeah, I usually simplify that.
I guess I will have to go back to the other thing to see the what we need to do, but it was. So I think one thing to point out is how we are defining on-budget. So on-budget here means on-budget, we simply do budget for it. or it also means we under budget. So if we under budgeted for it, it falls into that 35,000 threshold. And it's important thing to know, that documentation is required all along.
So in essence, in this case, sticking with the city manager example, then if a given item reaches what is budgeted, but it requires an expenditure over budget, that can go up to $35,000.
Correct.
So the total authorization then could be, in that example, 85,000.
Total
I'm
authorization.
just, as long as we're clear about that, and obviously I think this graphic says you've contemplated that occurrence.
No, I think what she's saying is that under budgeted falls under the thresholds for unbudgeted. So if your purchase was you budgeted $50,000 and went to make the purchase and it's 55,000, now you're gonna fall under the unbudgeted. So now you're 55, now it's gonna require city council. And it's gonna require you to go to, this might be getting into the weeds a little bit, but you're gonna have to go to work with finance to determine where those extra funds are gonna come from.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Is that answering your question?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if there's a $50,000 purchase, what's the process after that? Does it then come? I mean, does the city council at some point see that that was made and that, like, do we get to weigh in on it or
So on the budgeted side, are you talking
Yeah,
about?
well-
So on the budget,
any of them? I mean,
so if it falls under the city council threshold, it will be brought to you just like it is today. So today they bring the purchase to you for approval for the purchase and approval for the payment. Same thing. No change to that.
right, but if it's under, say, city manager threshold, does the city council then get to like
Do you want to purchase?
endorse that somehow or it's done?
The- Typically with a purchasing policy, so once you establish those thresholds, so if it was within the city manager's authorization and it's a budgeted item, you would have seen or authorized it as part of the budget process.
Okay.
And then we are just effectuating that work plan. And in something that is whatever the final numbers decided by council are, but for this as an example, if it's 50,000, if it was purchasing a vehicle, police car that was under the 50,000, it was a budgeted item, the council would not see that end result unless once the checks were cut as part of that.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Colette.
I was just gonna say, I support this. I guess I haven't seen it separated by budgeted and unbudgeted. But this is similar to what I do in my day job and it's higher. So the fact that it's 50,000 seems very reasonable. So certainly in support of what you've got here.
Anyone else? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, payment authorization. So in the council packet, there's a full list of items that finance can pay prior to your approval, the council approval, which you give by reviewing the schedule of bills. One of the items on that list I want to call your attention to, and it is the performance and event payments. So lots of times when we are securing a vendor for an event, we have to pay them a deposit. So we're proposing that we add that to the list of purchases that we can pay prior to receiving your approval. Does anybody have any questions about this list? Anything on that list? Okay. Change order authorization. So this is new. This is brand new. We don't have anything in our policy about change orders today. just to get you kind of in the mindset about change orders. For finance, the kind of things we're seeing for change orders would be, like if someone purchased a vehicle and they created a purchase order for that, and then they realized, oh, I needed to purchase an extra set of keys, then they have to do a change order. Or if someone made a purchase and they forgot to include shipping on their purchase order, they need to make a change to their purchase order. Those are kind of some of the similar things that we see in finance. So this slide addresses those types of changes. And it allows different thresholds that you can see following the purchasing thresholds, basically, for changes. And then I've given some examples as well. I'll give you a second to look at those examples and let me know if you have any questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just one clarification, make sure I'm understanding the verbiage. When you say, I'll just pick on the department director, $10,000 up to 10% of the original PO. Let's say the original PO was 120,000.
Mhm.
So can they go up to 12,000?
They're, they can go. Let me think. They
See,
can
is
go
this an
up,
or, up to 10,000
it is or,
or
it is or.
up? Yeah, so, yeah, so I'm a little confused. Yeah, you may want to clarify just how that, if I was reading that for the first time, so is it 10,000 or up to 10% of the original contract? So let's say if I have $1 million contract, then the department director can sign off for 100,000.
So this slide does not address public improvements. I
Okay,
don't know if that helps, but so like in your examples, if your contract was, you know, a $10,000 contract, your director can approve change orders up to $1,000.
that's fine, but yeah,
Am I answering your question?
well, I'm not sure. Did I answer? Did I ask that the right way?
So is 10% the maximum?
10% of any PO?
10% of the purchase order.
Any PO.
Yes,
So they could approve an amount in excess of the 10,000.
yes,
Okay, so not
So 10,000 is not the max. So it's really the larger of,
the higher of 10,000
So-
or,
it's the higher of 10,000 or 10% of the original PO. Right?
yes.
Okay.
That's a better way to state it.
Yeah, you may want to work with the, yeah, let's make that a little clearer because it was not clear until we talked about it.
Any other questions on that? Will, I can't tell if you're reading or if you have a question.
He's deep in thought.
I know it can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I'm just
this is deep
wrapping my head
contemplation.
around it.
Just contemplating.
Yes, thinking. Thank you.
Okay. So for public improvement, these same situation, we do not address public improvement changes in our current policy. Obviously, public improvement projects are much higher in revenue or in expenses. So our thresholds are higher as well. Giving you a moment to read those examples.
So is that, wait. So it's a budgeted?
Yes. So if it goes over the budget, then it goes to council.
So as long as it's budgeted,
Yes.
they can approve up to those amounts.
So obviously, well. I'll leave it at that.
But you're saying if it's if it's a budgeted PO, let's take like $500,000. If it's a budgeted item and it's a public improvement for $500,000, then they could go up to 10% of that or $50,000, or they could actually go up to department director could go up to 150. I mean, that's so let's say the original PO and budget was $500,000. And now they want to sign off on a change order that's $50,000. Now that puts you above the budgeted amount.
If you go over the budget, then it goes to council.
If it goes over the budget, then it goes to council. Okay.
But there could be instances when, say, we approve several that are smaller. So I could approve a $50,000 change to a project, say our trunk sewer, for example. That's not
Yeah.
a small project. So let's say I do a $50,000 change order and then a $100,000 change order. So now I'm at my 150 max. The next change order is only $1,000. Because I'm over my 150, I have to bring that $1,000 change order to city council.
Oh, so this is cumulative on a PO.
Correct.
So is there any, I'm just gonna pick on Mike since he brought it up. Yeah, so if he wants to approve those 50 and $100,000 change orders, is he the only one needing to put a signature on that? Is that a single signature approval? By what we're doing here?
We haven't actually figured out exactly how we're gonna implement this in practice. Because New World, our system, we're not sure that it's gonna do what we thought it could do. So
Okay.
it might be a manual type of process.
Because you're saying the change order aspect is a new,
The change order thresholds are
Thresholds.
new. We have change orders today.
yeah, we had change orders, but
Yeah,
these are much different thresholds than I assume than what you had in the
Yeah.
past.
we had none before.
Oh, you had none before?
We did not. We had-
Wow.
Before we had the 3,500 max that we could spend as a director. So when I have a $10 million project, if there's a change of 3,500, which isn't even a stick of pipe on that. trunk
I
sewer
understand
project,
that part.
That's why we're changing this.
No, I'm totally on board with that. I'm just saying at a certain point, if you have $100,000 change order, I mean, it's a pretty, still for a city, pretty large amount. So there should at least be another John Hancock on that to say, yep, I've looked at it, move it on. And
Well, it gets the department director's approval. It also goes through finance,
okay,
So,
making sure that it's within budget.
yeah,
so kind of just to summarize, at least my understanding, all of this is permissible. All of these kinds of change order approvals are permissible so long as the necessity for the change order is within the budgeted amount for that, whatever that activity is.
Yep.
Okay. And as Mike illustrated, there could be a series of change orders that all of a sudden bring us up to the budgeted amount. And anything additional over and above that would need to come
Mhm.
to council.
Yep.
Because we're exceeding the budgeted amount.
Right.
Um,
Or exceeding the 150,000.
so I'm going to, I guess, admit, Leanne, I probably less frequently than is necessary scan through in detail, our financial reports and our monthly report about which checks are written. I've done that. And there have been occasions when I've had questions, but it seems in the volume of that information, would it be possible, again, kind of sticking with the example that Mike posited for us, would it be possible to have a report on a monthly basis that says, here's where there were internal approvals, change orders approved. And maybe they, I would have to say for something that might be $1,000 is below detectable limit for us, but to set some threshold that if it exceeds X, we'll just put it on a summary list of change orders just so that it streamlines city council's awareness. Because quite honestly, in some projects, I won't name any, but our experience has been, there have been a series of necessary change orders that ultimately became problematic to us. And so that report may give us that visibility to say, is something jumping off track here? And Now, I would also say I have absolute confidence in the leadership team that if something's jumping off track, they're going to bring it to us. But it may give us that ability just to ask, is this okay or not okay? And the answer may be, it's okay. It's all about visibility. It's not about, at least from my vantage point, necessarily the micromanagement of it, but it might then give us that additional reporting that is, make sure that we're acting in accord with, our responsibilities to our residents. Anyway, that was kind of long-winded, right?
That sounds like a very reasonable request.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Just so that we have at least some report or something that shows us that these are the decisions that were made on expenditures that didn't come through council. I think that's just, it's just doing our job.
Yeah.
Sarah, you don't have anything anymore? Go ahead.
I was thinking the exact same thing that Randy, wow, I'm awful on names today. What's his name? Grant was saying.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem, sorry. But my thought when I was thinking about this was, maybe the report is only for projects and not necessarily if, there's a budgeted amount for, buying a new computer for something and it went over by $100, but we don't need to know that. Things like that. So just, yeah. Plus the Rose reports are for the public too. So not only are we gonna see it, public can see that when the agendas are published. So transparency if things are going over. So thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Disposal authority. So our disposal policy is not really changing too much. The only thing that we added was having thresholds in the disposal policy similar to the purchasing threshold. So it would allow the directors to dispose of surplus property up to their purchasing thresholds, basically. So if they had something that was worth $10,000, they could determine the best method of disposal and dispose of it. So that was really the only change for the disposal piece. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay, next steps. So our next steps would be to complete an internal review of the policy and to finalize the format and bring it into the Marion branding guidelines. Future city council actions would be to approve the policy at the April 20th meeting. And it would be effective with July 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year. We would update a couple of park board documents, and we would rescind 4 documents that will now be merged into the purchasing policy. So the 5 documents now become 1. Any other questions on anything that I've covered or not covered?
Just one more comment. One thing I do every session or every time we get the payment schedule is I review that every 2 weeks. Every time we get that, I'm reviewing that. I do my own listing of every payment we make over $25,000. So, the old 80-20 rules I learned 40 years ago in accounting, 20% of the actions represent 80% of the volume. It's exactly right there as well. So I look at every check over $25,000. It always represents around 75 to 80% of the totality of all of the payments made for that run. And it is usually around 15 to 20 checks. Okay. So a lot of them are either in our agenda that we're talking about, was construction or somebody like that, or it's the city of Cedar Rapids, or it's the IRS with the ACH payment. Some of them are repetitive all the time on some of the larger ones. So, just by doing that, I always get a pretty good comfort level of what's going through there. And I'm looking at 75% of the dollars by just doing that action. So, that's a pretty easy, quick comfort level that I get every 2 weeks. So.
Oh, go ahead. Oh,
I'll go at the end.
So, I guess on Steve's point, sort of the threshold that he's doing his scan, maybe that's a design criteria for the report you could pull and just almost make that like a cover sheet. Herein is noted these particular, elements. I mean, that just streamlines the review of that particular, document, which if I remember correctly is kind of lengthy, but at any rate, I think it just maybe supports or is aligned with what I was saying earlier.
We can look at a different format for the schedule of bills.
Yeah,
I will say, when we're saying that, bear in mind that schedule of bills right now is printed directly from the software. Anything beyond that is us manually doing labor, so I'm not in favor of doing that, but we can look at other reports that we could pull to supplement that are just easy, quick pulls.
Thank you.
all right.
Go ahead, Mike.
So I just want to share, this is, I don't know how many numbers of purchasing manuals I've been a part of, but it is something that is always, it's always an uncomfortable conversation that staff and council have, because we're dealing with taxpayer dollars. And I mean, Mayor, I know exactly where you're going. Like, you guys are the elected officials of this community, and you've got to be able to look at the taxpayers in the eye and say, yes, I'm aware of that. And that's what we all want. And make sure that you have the information you need, make your informed decisions to be able to we all have the responsibility to the taxpayers. So this is a really difficult thing. And we deal with dollar amounts that not everybody deals with on a daily basis. I mean, we deal with projects that are millions a lot, and that's not something that the average citizen, the average resident understands or deals with on a regular basis. So these numbers are baselines that, as Rita mentioned, we kind of took from our comparables to find out what works for us, because we don't want to slow a business. We don't want to slow projects. If we have a road project and we got to do a change order, that might stall the project and might inconvenience the residents more, and if we have to wait to get it before council. So we're trying to figure out a way to keep the business going, at the same time internally making sure we got our checks and balances in place to make sure that finance is aware, I'm aware, the department heads are aware of what's happening. That being said, if there are numbers in here that you are not comfortable with, please let us know and we can tweak it. And as Rita said, we'll go through this on an annual basis, much like we will with our personnel manual and some other documents, that if the council feels more comfortable with lower numbers, to get comfortable with it and get comfortable with the process, and we kind of work out that flow, we can evaluate it the following year and increase to a level that you feel more comfortable. But I kind of sense that there might not be a comfort level with some of these numbers. And if that's the case, we want to make sure that we're hitting, because it is kind of an art with this.
I mean, I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. And it's not about, for me personally, it's not about the numbers per se. It's just making sure there's the right process so that we can feel comfortable that we're doing our job, and that we're fulfilling our responsibility of oversight so that we can answer. It's not about trust with anyone, but we're setting up a process for all people, for all time, who may work in this organization, maybe long after everybody in this room is no longer involved here. So, I mean, it's not about trust or anything like that. It's about setting up a right process that we can feel comfortable with, that is transparent and is allowing us to answer questions and feel comfortable that we're fulfilling our duties. So thank you for bringing that up. You have something? I sense you do.
I was just going to add to that. I think the grant suggestion, right, with that additional sort of report or whatever we want to call it, adds the level of transparency. It's
Right.
not about the numbers at all. I appreciate you bringing that up. And right, that is our responsibility to make sure we're using taxpayer dollars appropriately. So it seems like what you've presented is great. And then the addition of what Grant has recommended makes a whole lot of sense and increases that level of transparency, which is always good for us. So I'm good with the numbers where they are based on that.
One last thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, in looking at the comparables that you pulled together for the staff memo, or the, what you're proposing seems to be in line certainly with Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. And I think, of course, I know there's some put and takes with the rest of them, but it seems to be, geared consistent with a larger municipality. So I'm certainly comfortable with the numbers that you're proposing.
Anyone else? Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you very much.
And just one thing, Mayor and Council, and I think this is important for anybody watching at home, that when this policy, once council approves a policy, one thing that we are putting an emphasis on internally, and we're going to be rolling out a Marion University training curriculum for our entire organization. But when this gets approved, that we're going to make sure that our teammates are fully aware of this, and that we are, we're religiously following the policy. So that is something that we will continue to do, continue to train on things like this. So that you and the rest of the community can have that confidence that we're doing the best on their behalf.
Okay.
I'm hanging out for the next item.
Oh, you're still on the agenda. Okay,
Just trying to save time.
please proceed. Thank you. So
So
next
the-
on the agenda, next on the agenda is the discussion and direction on the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget. So please. Go ahead.
Hopefully the majority of these slides are going to look familiar to you. Bringing back the slides from the budget work session, we had red flagged that October 26th state issues the rollback order because of the Senate file that was pending at that time of our work session. So that Senate study bill that was 1056 was actually approved, adopted, and signed on February 20th, and did change that rollback calculation from approximately 56 to 54%. So I'm going to start by sharing, what did that do? Where does that put us with the decisions that we'd made? And then we'll go back and visit what those decisions were. And I also do have that general fund model to hand out. I'm going to give some preemptive information before I actually hand it over. It's really there to show you kind of the scenario analysis that we're trying to get to help inform decisions moving forward. So from a valuation standpoint, you can see I did leave the previous line up there, just striking it out on the regular. We would have seen an increase of 3.1%. We're seeing actually less than, but 0.1% rounded increase. What does that mean? When we're looking at the property tax levy, at the time of the work session, we were looking at approximately $15.10. But then council did make the decision to delay microtransit, which would have decreased that levy amount to approximately $14.78. But now due to the rollback, we're looking at increasing that levy back up to $15.05. And that's not adding property tax dollars. That's using the same numbers to the extent that we can. So what does that look like for the residents? A $200,000 home would see an increase of $108. That was previously around $140. You can read the rest of the numbers. So it does truly decrease the amount residents are paying. It also will decrease, as you'll see in a few moments, the amount of revenue we're bringing in. So multi-residential is still an overall decrease. It was 562, it's now 703. Commercial property, 157 down to 32. So for the overall general fund, I kept up there the fiscal year 24 recommended that we had and put up the fiscal year 24 pending. It's what we're naming kind of where we're at right now. You can see that overall net position dropped to -2 million from the previous -1.5. So where does that put our general fund balance? We were at 10.448. And then it was 9.98 million. And now, that's what I mean. So we're looking at 31.9%, which does still meet that minimum reserve of 25%. Overall, it's a $468,000 drop. If we implement the franchise fees, we could bring that back up to 10,470,000. We'll talk about that in a few slides here. I did want to go ahead and hand out, but before I do, I want you to know that the general fund model is a work in progress. We have not dived into each of the different components of it. The general fund model is going to represent the entire general fund, not just the operating fund, because when you are opening those audited financial statements, they're including the general fund, the equipment reserve fund, the tax stabilization fund, the pension fund, and so forth. So we're looking at it in total. We are trying to be extremely conservative in our numbers. It has come out that the county had sent out, the assessor had sent out the increase across the states, approximately 22% on average. In Marion, or in Lynn County, there are areas that are seeing up to 40% increase in value for residential homes. Built into the model right now, we have 15%. We kept a 2% growth on commercial and residential. We chose to take the rollback down to 52%. It may end up being lower than that. We really just have no idea. It's about like a shot in the dark. So the first page, we can go ahead and get into them. So when you get into the numbers, as I'm going to say, we had made some general assumptions, and we need to dive into each of the areas and get more detailed. So this is a work in progress. The first page is showing actual 100% valuation. The second page, taxable valuation. And you'll have time to digest this. The Steves of the world, we can absolutely sit down and talk about it in more detail. Page 3 is going to show the property tax rates and revenues. Page 4 is showing the general fund operating summary. So for instance, when I say this is a work in progress, we need to dive in, as we've said, as a takeaway from the budget onto asset replacement schedules. And what does that equipment reserve look like? So if you were looking at this model right now, we've carried forward, I believe it's a $1.5 million year over year that we're spending. That is probably not true. And that's an area we're going to dive in and figure out. So for the purposes of this discussion, aside from giving you the general fund model, if you look at page 4 versus the page that I put in after that, that just says page 1, and focus your eyes down to the cash balances. This is indicated to show you what difference that franchise fee, that 1% franchise fee could make. So what I'm saying is don't let the fund balances in total alarm you yet, because we have a lot of work to do and this model isn't 100% built out. But from a scenario base, the only difference between page 4 and that additional page 5, which is page 1, is simply that we've added franchise fee, 1%. I'm gonna give you just a moment to look at that, and then I'm gonna tell you that you'll have plenty of time to digest the model, but we can kind of talk about the decisions that were made and revisit those. So the slides that I kept, these are exactly the slides from our discussion. I've kept the ones that are highlighted because those are ones that either increase costs, and the other two, because based on the decisions you made, they were actually decreases. I shouldn't say increase cost, but increase revenue. or increased cost. So these again were the funded non-recurring items. Staff still wouldn't recommend any changes to that. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. I'm going to pause on each one and feel free to come back at the end and have more discussion. The non-bargaining wage increase. Staff is still suggesting we stick with the 4%. Franchise fees, staff actually would recommend that we proceed with this, switching from 4% to 5% on the franchise fees. That's why I was showing the numbers on the general fund model. It essentially makes up, plus a little bit extra, the difference from the rollback order. And then have to put it back in front of you. Emergency levies, still an option out there. Obviously with the change in valuation, that would be $506,968 at the full amount. For anyone that's curious, that would be $29 for a $200,000 house per year if you were to choose to use the emergency levy. Not particularly a staff recommendation. However, I do want you to be aware that one of the bills that is proposed right now in session, having this levy would protect us a little bit on what our max levy calculation going forward, because they're looking at consolidating a lot of levies and computing based on what you're levying now, what those max dollars or max levy could be. Again, this is just a proposed bill, doesn't mean it will move forward, doesn't mean it will be passed, but I do want you to have that information.
Go ahead, Steve.
Question on the emergency levy, since we have never used that, at least since I've been on city council, just to make sure we're understanding that correctly. So we can put that in up to the maximum of 0.27, and that would stay there unless we decided to take it out in future years.
It doesn't just stay there. It's part of the certification that you do year over year.
Okay,
So you could choose to use it one year and then not use it the next year.
right. But once we use it, it's in there unless we decide to take it out. Or do we have to approve it,
You would.
essentially approve it each year?
You would essentially approve it each year. It's the budget process that we follow. We start from zero, we build it up. So it would be a decision point year over year over year for council, so long as this type of levy is still allowed by state law.
Okay, thanks.
It's authorized and included, but not necessarily used unless we need to.
I think to answer your question, where we're at in the process, we did include it in the maximum property tax public hearing and the public notice. So that is there if we want to use it this budget cycle.
Right.
However, we're needing the direction today so that we can put forth that final public hearing notice for the budget, which actually sets what the property tax rate will be.
I think the other comment you made is I'm not sure, make sure everybody understands the relevance of the potential legislation that is out there that may start restricting cities on what they can do for their overall tax rate. So there's a bill sitting out there that may impact that. And I think later on, we need to probably cover that in more detail. I'm not sure everybody's aware of the possible impact of that yet.
High level net impact, just very, very briefly and very quickly. For us right now, not utilizing the emergency levy, it would essentially mean that we lose the 13.5 cent civic center levy and the library levy. So 17.5 cents per thousand. And then we did have the police step compression as a decision point that is included in the budget currently, and the firefighters. And really quickly, an update on the firefighters. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chief Fagan when it comes to the grant that we talked about at the work session.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I wanted to provide an update on the SAFER grant, which is the FEMA grant that I had mentioned was a possibility to assist with some recovery of dollars for these positions. We did pursue the grant, so we opened up the application. As a part of the application process, we found that we did not have sufficient data to meet the grant requirements at this time. And so we were not able to make application for the grant. There are other opportunities, though, in the future that we will be pursuing. One of them is a emergency medical services apprenticeship grant through the state of Iowa. That did become available this year as well. We did look into it. We were not able to meet the deadline with that either, but we believe in communication with our partners in the area that may be another opportunity potentially opening up again or again next year. I wanted to provide an update that we did investigate these grants because we did share that as a potential support, financial support to help with these positions.
Chief, I think I heard you say that we didn't have the complement of data in order to be compliant with application for the grant.
Yes, I can explain further on that. So part of the data requirements through the U.S. Fire Administration requires call counts extrapolated in a certain way, distributed over 3 years. And that's historically not how we have reported in that manner. It is the process that we are converting to at this time. We do complete all of our reports per compliance, but they have to be extrapolated in a very specific way per the U.S. Fire Administration. And in order to make that conversion, we would not be able to do that in time to meet the deadline for the grant. So it is something that is an opportunity in the future, but for this year, we do not have the data extrapolated in a way that would meet the requirements of the U.S. Fire Administration for FEMA.
So understanding those requirements, let's just fast forward a year or 18 months. Will we have a sufficient R of data that then we can do the extrapolations?
It's possible. I would anticipate it most likely within 2 years. We're reconciling 2023 because we're early enough in the year to have the 3 years of data. We would be better positioned in the future for the grant.
Anyone else? Okay, anything else, Chief?
So with that, I'm really turning it over to the city council. Just as a reminder, when it comes to the budget, the next step is to submit to the paper that publication that actually sets the max levy in total. We technically can come down from there. So the question, there's really two questions in front of you. One is franchise fees. Truthfully, that doesn't have to be made. Looking at Ryan, because he wasn't actually here on Friday. Truthfully, because it's on the revenue side, that decision doesn't particularly need to be made right away. Emergency levy, if it's something that they want, that you would want us to include, I would need to know. Because normally I just wouldn't include that 27 cents. I mean, based on the direction we got at the work session, we have it in case we want to use it, but we weren't intending on using it. So if you're wanting to use it, I would need to plug it into this publication. And then the other thing is on the franchise fee front, there is a process. So giving us the direction now does better put us in a spot to get everything lined up and ready to go so that we can proceed with that.
What's the timeline for that decision?
The franchise fee,
No,
the publication,
publication.
I need the direction this week so that we can submit it to the paper. So you're asking like what actually goes to the paper?
Yeah, because everything I know got extended from the end of March till the end of April. So does that apply to this publication or does this publication need to be done in March then?
It's early April, but it has to be submitted to the paper. It's the publication rules. I admit I did not actually write down the
Okay.
date, but
Sorry, Leanne, there's like with the publication in the newspapers, it's like, it's not less than 15 days, not more than 10, 20. So there's a window that we have by law within which we have to get it. So that kind of dictates the rest of our schedule.
Okay, so you want the emergency levy, anyone have any thoughts on that? Go ahead.
Well, my thought would be to include it as the maximum, and we still have the ability. What's our last, well, so if we include it. So if we include that, one, that's for publication, that's the maximum we can go to. But then the decision timeline,
Would be, at
which we need to finalize our levy rate is what then after that?
I would recommend that we have a discussion at the next set of council meetings to
Right.
make that final decision if you're wanting the additional time to make that decision.
Yes.
That way, when we bring forth that budget for adoption, it's at those lower numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always okay publicizing a higher number. And especially with the legislation that is out there, we don't know what they're gonna do. Kind of like, the past couple of years, I'd rather go in high and have the ability to go finalize it at a lower rate. So that'd be my comfort level.
Okay with that too.
Well, I agree with Steve's approach on this. A question though, emergency levy. What's the definition of that for? What are the specific uses
Can
that
be
are
used-
encompassed with that?
Can actually be used for any lawful corporate purpose.
Anything.
I think the emergency is kind of a misnomer.
Yeah. So in this particular case, there are certain things that if I remember from the budget work session, firefighters, was one of those that seemed to be pretty important items that we would logically want to protect, then this emergency levy can offset those costs?
It could.
Okay, all I guess I'm trying to understand what the availability and of application is for that emergency levy.
Emergency levy, as I said, can be used for any corporate purpose. So just as you use the general levy, you can use this emergency levy in the same manner.
Okay. Well,
I was just gonna say, I am not comfortable in bringing forward the emergency level and publishing that. I'm okay with the franchise fee, but I'm not in the camp of doing that. I understand that that doesn't tie us to that, right? That it gives us just a chance to have sort of more conversation. But as I think about, sort of long-term and where we are, from a resident's perspective, I just am not in support of that.
anyone else? Go ahead.
just, is there any of the decisions that were made or direction that was provided to us at the work session regarding the non-bargaining wage increases or the firefighters that the council wished to revisit? Or are you still comfortable with the direction that was provided?
Personally, I'm still comfortable with those decisions. I mean, we outlined after that day-long discussion about the budget, what some other options were. One of those was the franchise fee. One was the emergency levy. So I mean, we still had some other options. I think the more concerning discussions to me are going to be coming about in the next year as we talk about these new assessments that are coming out, as we talk about the longer term concern about losing the amount of money that we have set aside. So I think as we talk about that, I think this is the right decision for this year, but I think we need to figure out how to manage all of this on a longer term basis. So I think those are going to be some discussions this summer. So I'm okay with it, but I'm kind of like, I'm halfway with Colette in that like, we may end up with the franchise fee, but again, I'm okay publishing the levy, but not necessarily at this time enacting it.
Anyone else? I think we need to give a consensus here, so go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the question on the I understand the emergency levy on the franchise, then would it have to take a council a change to remove that 1% in the future if we decided to reduce it back down, or is that, I'm trying to recall, I think once that's established and set, it takes action to modify again in the future, correct? It does not reset like the emergency levy.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
I will say on the franchise fees, just as a reminder, the benefit of the franchise fee, just a reminder, a new homeowner generally doesn't, there's a delay when they actually start paying property taxes. However, the franchise fee hits the utility bill. So the moment that power gets turned on or the gas gets turned on, they do start contributing. Also, any nonprofit organization or church, all of those entities would also be paying the franchise fee where they may not pay property tax.
Good point. So, Randy, did you have a?
I guess I'm leaning towards the franchise fee as well. I'm a little concerned about going into the tapping into that emergency. To me, that just seems like just like it's what it's labeled. But yet we understand what legislation is doing as well too. So these are pressing times, they're going to require pressing changes. So I like the franchise because it spreads that tax base across all entities. It's not excluding or including entities by title, so that it is strictly by utilization. So I would lean towards the franchise fee.
Is there anyone who objects to the franchise fee increase? Okay, so I think you have the direction on that, but back to the emergency levy. Do you have something, Ryan?
I have some closing remarks.
Okay.
Question.
Yes, go ahead.
So including a franchise fee, generally speaking, for the priorities and direction we gave previously for some critical issues, how does that respond to protecting those important matters and allows them to go forward?
At this particular point, it helps with the gap. We had already, I could go back to the general fund slide, I guess. So notice the $2 million year over year, that would decrease that 2 million by approximately 500,000 if you use a nice round number. So that would be negative 1.5 million. And that's where we're going to go back and look at fines and fees. We're going to go back and look at other.
That's exactly part of what I was going to articulate in my closing remarks. When at the end of our budget work session, we had asked council for approval to proceed with looking at our fines and fees, looking at that library levy, now that we have a new library up and running. We're having the fee schedule where we're going to spend the next several months going through and making sure that those fees are covering the cost of providing certain services and making sure that the general fund or the property taxes are not subsidizing those services. To make sure that the property tax dollars are going to those services, police, fire, that it should be funded for. So that is what we are going to continue to do, to Councilman Jensen's point about next year. And so working on that research, working with DA Davidson on continuing to flush out the general fund model and the model of the other funds that we've been working on. That is a critical point in understanding what is and what can be and where we should go, and trying to predict where some pitfalls might be. We're also, one of the things that we've talked about too, is we're in a process right now where we're evaluating our health insurance program. That is a cost center that is included on the property tax levy and does have an impact on our fund. So That's something that I wanted to share. We talked about that during our budget workshop. But also want to make sure that those that are viewing or will watch this later, that they have an understanding that we are taking efforts to be proactive on this front. And the reason that we're here today having this conversation again is because of actions being taken at the state level in Des Moines. And, on that front as well, we, the city, are actively working with legislators in Des Moines to try to be part of a solution, because there's been quite a bit of press that the property tax system, the assessment system in the state is not necessarily functioning in a way that is competitive. That's the message that we are hearing, and we city have been out there indicating that we want to be at the table, we want to be part of the solution to make sure that we can explain how we do our budgeting, how we've gone through. We started zero, build it up. We just don't add on from year over year. And I think that's something that's really important for our residents to understand. How we do it is likely different than many communities across the state do it. It's unfortunate what's happening right now with this having to come back and revisit some of these decisions that were made. And it's a difficult time to be a city in the state of Iowa.
I'm gonna claim to be the new person again. And so maybe I look at this like our residents do, and I just need a little more time, or maybe to someone to sit down and go over this, because this is just a lot and I kind of feel like we have a big problem. We have all these numbers, and then it's like, okay, well, if we just do a little bit here and a little bit there, but I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around the fact of the example of, we have residents who just are like seeing assessment things that didn't come from us. But they're still seeing them, and they're feeling pinches all over. And then we're sitting here talking about, well, our funds are cut. Well, I get that, and people get that, but I don't know that we have a lot of sympathy for the fact that our funds were cut and why now we can raise things here and again. And I want to be very sensitive to how we are addressing this budget, because it's still being paid for by the people who live here, and a lot of it on our property tax payers, our property taxpayers, the people who are investing in our community. And I hate that it just continually comes back on their back. That's why I probably lean toward like franchise fees and other pieces, so it's not just on the property taxpayer. But I don't know that I can give you a really good answer, because this is just a lot. Until we kind of sit down and say, what does this do to a person? We can raise it and it comes back to us. But it still says, oh, look, we just put another option for another levy on our books. Maybe we need to, but this is, like I say, we're flipping through slides and I'm kind of tracking along, and I'm going back to here, and I get it. The funds went down from what we budgeted. But I don't know that I'm comfortable with what we're raising on the emergency levy, even though I see why you say it would be a good idea to have that in our toolbox in the case it's needed. And I know $29 on 200,000 and.
Well, and really quick, I did say at this particular time, it wasn't a staff recommendation that we necessarily move forward with it.
Okay.
But we wanted to bring it back because it is definitely something city council should consider. And we wanted you to have that additional information of the potential impacts of a property tax bill. We're still planning on, we have the reserves right now. We can eat some money this year. No, that's the best way of saying it. Balance it with
A spend down of use of cash, spend down of reserves that is over and above our policy limit. But continuing to do that year over year is a bad practice.
Right.
The point of, and the documents that were provided to you are illustrative at this point. This is meant to show that we are putting together documents to look ahead, to see those impacts of those decisions, to make sure that when we're managing the city's finances, we're doing it in a proper and appropriate manner, that we are very cognizant of not to continue to spend down those reserves to a point where it's below our policy limits. So that's what that is for. Regarding that emergency levy, the publication, by law, we have to publish the max of what could be levied. So that's where this emergency levy comes into play. If we publish it, it doesn't mean that the council will, that doesn't hold you to approving that levy. It gives you the additional time and ability to, perhaps something drops next week before the budget hearing, that might change your mind and say, oh boy, now we have to continue to fund, otherwise we have to cut significant services. So it gives you that flexibility to use it if the council deems it necessary as part of that budget hearing. But if we publish it, it's purely, it's a procedural thing more than anything. Staff, we're not recommending, we have not recommended, we didn't recommend it at the budget workshop to use that emergency levy, but it is our duty to report to you that these are your options should you choose to go that route.
And I greatly appreciate the fact that we are pushing to be at the table as we look at this overall system. And as the conversations continue to occur, that decisions are impacting our local residents. So I applaud you for pushing to be a part of that, because that we are caught in the middle of those decisions that happen. So that's a good thing. So real quick, so we all know that emergency services are a big point with us right now in the budget and needing to hire folks. So, but the levy, like if we did a levy like this, that can or can't be used for those, we could use that to, we could do that to hire firefighters, or we could do that for, at least if we needed to fill that budget. I think that's where it becomes more comfortable, when it's a directed impact. You can see what that is doing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, right, the ankle bone's connected to the shoulder bone, right? I mean, everything's interconnected here. So I'm gonna kind of jump ahead to another item that's on your agenda for this purpose only, and that's the traffic cameras. To this point, we have never, staff has not run any sort of numbers, financial numbers whatsoever as it relates to the traffic cameras. The presentations that we have given the council has purely been about safety and allocation of our police officers. However, we do know that there is likely going to be some revenue sources based off of that. And one of the things that we're going to talk about as it relates to the traffic cameras is that in the policy that is included in your packet, one of the things that, I don't know, did the change get included? Yeah. So in the amended packet, there's language in there that says that any sort of revenues that would be collected on the enforcement for traffic cameras would be dedicated primarily to public safety needs, with a caveat that they may also be included for civil rights grant, which we'll talk about later. But my point of that is, if council implements that, we don't know what those revenues, we don't know what that would bring in terms of fines for people violating the traffic laws. That would be something else that would be factored into next budget year or the year after that, once we have real data, because that might also, that would go towards public safety. That would have an impact possibly on that fund balance, that negative number. And it would allow us to do some better projections. So, and again, I go back to how we do our budget compared to others. We don't just start at what we did last year and add 1% onto that. We're actually going, since I've been here and it's only been a year and a half, what we do 2 budget cycles is we'll go back, we start from zero. The departments have to start from zero and build their budget for what we need to provide the services. And then it's those other projects. So again, we're trying to be as fiscally responsible while providing the services to the community that they're expecting, that we're hearing from them in our community survey. You know, and again, it's a difficult time with the state legislature. So.
Again, I want to make sure the other members of the city council understand exactly why I'm suggesting we do include the emergency levy. And it's for one reason and one reason only. And it's simply because of the one-sided wildcat legislative body that we have this year. And because what you outlined earlier, there's a bill out there where they're talking about combining the civic center levy and the library levy into the 810 levy. Okay, right now, that would take $325,000 out of our budget if they did that. Those are gone. We don't even have the option, if they did that, to even talk about increasing the library levy from 4 cents to 27 cents. That option is out the window. We don't know what they're going to do. So that is the only reason I'm suggesting we include it, and I hope we don't have to use it, but to have it there just in case the legislature does something that is very disadvantageous to the majority of every city in this state. So that's why I'm talking about including it, to have it available, but hopefully not needed, and have future discussions down the road for that.
So with the change in the timeline for our publication and approvals and all of that, that has come out of legislative action in Des Moines. I mean, there's a certain artificiality to the fact that we have to meet a publication date. Knowing full well, as all of us here understand, there is a lot to be examined and analyzed for before we actually get to some final answers on these considerations. So in order to, if I think of our total budget and it's the budgetary components as a set of needs that have been well contemplated, and we need to report what our funding requirements are against, as I tend to think, somewhat of an artificial timeline. If that in its composite is a project, I'm thinking like a project manager and saying, I want to protect my ability to be responsive to the need, but also protect my ability to severely scrutinize everything that's in front of us. And that leads me to the conclusion of, for publication purposes, to have the emergency levy in there, but knowing full well we have got a whole bunch of work in order to ever decide whether or not it would effectively be used. Now, Ryan, if I'm off base in my analysis there, please correct me, but that's how I'm viewing it. And I don't think anybody here wants to, exercise that in reality if necessary, but it just gives us, it allows us to, at least with some measure of comfort and understanding, to meet a publication date. It doesn't disobligate us to do the hard work of figuring out how not to use it. So that's kind of where I'm at. And so that was 13.6 paragraphs to say, I'm still in agreement with Steve.
Okay, go ahead, Will.
Earlier question about our decisions from the work session or the budget session. I'm fine with keeping where we were at with everything. And then when it comes to the levy, I think we should publish it with it in there. And I would like to find out more about this potential bill and how it's going to potentially could affect us. There's an expert that already knows everything about it. Maybe it's Steve. But I want to pick some brains about that before we make that decision on the levies for this fiscal year or this budget year.
So for clarification, when it's published, is it worded as it's a maximum, up to, or a maximum?
It's gonna show us the
Not a-
property tax certification, so it will show the levy. It will look to the residents like that is the amount that you're planning to,
Okay.
and you should remember that.
The published levy rate not included this.
This one does. The last one did not. Like the max levy hearing, which is actually the max property tax dollars.
But we've done this before with having that in there
Yes.
several years, so this is not out of the norm for what we do.
Anyone else have a, oh, go ahead.
We haven't put the emergency levy in there before, though.
We have
Okay.
used the emergency levy 1 year.
1 year, but not, it's
when
not
they were
every year.
contemplating phasing out the commercial rollback 1 year.
Got it. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that. Like, I understand the whole publishing, that doesn't lock us into it. But then I wanted to make sure that we don't, not every year, we haven't put the emergency level levy in there as part of a potential. This year we are, or there's folks are advocating for that, so.
Thanks. Anyone else have a? My sense is that, well, Colette and Randy are opposed to the emergency levy. I think we have 4 who are okay with it. Undecided and 1 undecided.
And we can bring back the next council meeting, this discussion, so that we can get the formal numbers for the adoption. I'll also bring back the publication date. I cannot remember if it's like 1 or 2 days before or 1 day after the council meeting.
We would have to send it to the Gazette by Monday, April 10th to be published on the 13th.
So it's like 2 days after the council meeting. Perfect.
You have what you need?
Yep.
Thank you for your patience and understanding as we go through this process again because of what's materialized, so.
Okay, next we have Lucas regarding compensation study.
Good afternoon. So we're gonna be talking about compensation study. I have a handout. So we should have Baker Tilly on Zoom. Lexi or Jada, are you there?
Yep, I can hear you guys great.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so the point of tonight, we have a few things on our agenda to do a project update. So what I handed out to you is kind of the timeline that was presented when we first did the RFP for the comp study. So the gold star is kind of where we're at, and I'm actually going to introduce you to our Baker Tilly team who has led or been points on this project. We have Jada Kent and Lexi Skolton. They both have been a huge asset to us in leading this project. So Lexi or Jada, would you want to jump in and give a project update for us?
Sure, I would be happy to do that. I'm Lexi Skolton. It's very nice to meet you all. Like Lucas said, I've been working with the city for this project since November of 2022. So quick project update. So we started with the project initiation, so the kickoff. That was back in November, and that included some in-person employee meetings. We had some members of our team come on site to explain our process and what the project will look like as a whole. After that, we started with, you'll see number 2, which is position review and data collection. So for data collection, we collected all of the city's data, meaning job descriptions, current salary structures, personnel policies, things of that nature. Then we moved into position review, which is in our internal equity piece. So we look at all of the city's positions and we use a compensable factor system to rate them against each other and to determine that hierarchy of positions within the city. Then number 3, we did market assessment, which we collected data from peer organizations. We collected data on their positions that were comparable to the city. And so that's our external equity piece. So again, comparing the city's positions to the market. And then where the yellow star is, number 4, pay plan development, that's where we are at now. So looking at developing pay plans for the city. After pay plan development, we're going to be looking at implementation cost estimates. So we will provide you with a few different scenarios of how much it'll cost to implement each of those different scenarios. Once we have calculated those, then we'll present to you, the council, and that is a part of our project completion process.
Do you guys have any questions before we dive into the pay plan design conversation?
Questions?
Okay, great. So for the pay plan design recommendations, we're going to be talking primarily about two different pay plans. In the handout, that's just a preview. I'm a visual person, so we have our step plan that's going to be based primarily off tenure. And once you accomplish your first year, you kind of just move up the steps accordingly. And then we have an open plan where we have a minimum, a midpoint, and then a max. And there's no like set system similar to the STEP program. There are pros and cons, or there's pros to both of these plans where the STEP plans, they're easy to budget because we know where employees are at. We know where they're going as far as steps. It's easy to have those projections. So then for our open plan, it allows us to keep that market competitive edge where we're not locked down to offering just that base rate. And so that also gives us the flexibility. We can adapt with the market a little bit easier as the market fluctuates. So our recommendation is to do a step pay plan for all union positions, and then a blended plan for non-union public safety. So a blended plan is just a combination of the two plans together. And so what we're recommending is the step plan, while they're non-union, we are recommending a step plan for comm center manager, sergeants, lieutenants, battalion chiefs, and division chiefs. The reason being on this is that, again, this will help from a budget perspective, but also it'll help fix the compression issues that we're experiencing now. And then it will continue to incentivize folks to grow in their career if they would want to do so. And then an open plan for the remainder of public safety. This will include administrative assistants. This will be the chiefs and deputy chiefs. And then we have a evidence technician in there as well. And then lastly, we have our open pay plan for the remainder. Basically, that's going to be all non-bargaining folks. So, everyone in this room, going to be your admins. Some of the positions listed on this sheet that I gave you is going to include those. So any questions on these recommendations?
Just a quick question. So is everybody on an open pay plan now?
No.
Including union?
Nope. So right now, the non-bargaining are on an open pay plan, and then all union are on a step. So
they're on a step plan now anyway.
correct. The only major difference that we're recommending is going to be the step plan for the comm center manager, sergeants, lieutenants, and battalion chiefs. And again, that's to fix the compression to help for that progression.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions?
Lucas, I got one here. For what I'm getting out of this, and I like what I see, but I'm a little confused. Is this more geared towards new hires going forward, or where do our top paid individuals fall into this for employee retention?
So that's a great question. That's a few steps down the line.
Okay. And I'll pull that question back if you're going to address it later.
But that's a really important question, which we will address.
Okay.
So what we're needing to do right now is just establish the design. So then that way Baker Tilly can then go create it. And then once we have those numbers, we'd be able to answer more of that question.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry that I jumped the gun there.
No.
Councilman Sternad, I think I know where you're going because we've had conversations about this. What Lucas explained is that follow-up is going to be kind of a policy development on how we administer that pay plan. So when somebody's at the top of the range and there's a salary adjustment for the cost of living, how that gets applied to the range so that we don't have this situation that we have today.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
This is sort of a summary question, but given the competitive environment that we're in, does this composite system enable us to compete fairly and squarely as we want?
That's a great question, which leads into the next slide. So what we're proposing is, so we're talking about these pay plan designs, but right now we don't have any cost estimates since we have yet to build them. So what we're recommending is that Baker Tilly create these pay plans with the match the market focus, so that way we are at market and we will have that specific cost estimate for us. So then, once we have that cost estimate, we can circle back with you guys and have that question, do we want to lead, lag, or match the market? And then we'll have dollars associated with that once the pay plans are built. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Great job on this. So when we see this down the road, because I know this is very preliminary, maybe this is for your folks. When you talk about matching the market, is that matching, this is salary, but the benefits package is not a part of this? Like, we'll see that later. So right now, all we're seeing is some pretty basic information on a salary or how it would look.
Correct.
But when you're talking about matching the market, but then I also think like that's private and public sector, when you talk about matching the market.
Correct.
But then there's certain areas where, like, I don't know that there's many private library directors.
Correct.
So some of that probably doesn't lend itself to that. Okay. I mean,
Yep.
just for clarification. So that comes in our future months, we see more of the, all you need from us is like, is this an okay piece? And then later on is where kind of the
Yep.
details come into play.
Yep. So the ask tonight is, are you guys comfortable with having the step pay plans for all union positions similar today? And then kind of that blended approach for the specified public safety positions, and then an open pay plan for the remainder of non-bargaining, which is also similar to today. And if you're comfortable with that, are we comfortable building this initially to match the market, simply to get that cost estimate? And so then we can then have the conversation of lead, lag, match.
Steve?
Yeah, I think conversations we've had in the past years is adding the sergeants, lieutenants, and other battalion chiefs in that group to the step plan makes sense, because we've had situations where getting a promotion is actually a reduction in pay. And so that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so to me, that's a good fix for the individuals at those levels. So, I mean, you got to be able to get those individuals, be willing to go up the ranks and not take a cut in pay, so.
Yep, absolutely.
Anyone else? Anyone with strong feelings in opposition to what's been presented?
Okay, cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lucas. Next on the agenda is a discussion for direction regarding automated traffic enforcement. Welcome.
Good evening.
Hi.
Okay, tonight I'm going to speak to you today about proposed ordinance for an automated traffic enforcement program that had been presented previously to council at work sessions and had been requested to be drafted and brought forward for consideration. The automated traffic enforcement, or ATE camera ordinance, will first and foremost allow for ATE cameras to be used in Marion. So this is the ordinance piece. Excuse me. This would include both red light cameras and speed cameras. The ordinance we are presenting is similar in verbiage to other existing ordinances already being used in the state of Iowa. So we're pretty comfortable with it in that respect. The contractor that provides the equipment, they will own the equipment. We don't have anything to do with that, so we don't buy it or anything like that. It's theirs because they oversee it. Citations issued by the ATE cameras will go to the vehicle owner. I think most people are aware of that from the one Cedar Rapids had, but they do go to the vehicle owner. This individual would have two opportunities to appeal. First, to a member of the police department command staff, whomever we would assign to take on that function. And secondly, through the courts via what's called a municipal infraction. All right. There are exemptions listed in the ordinance, such as, I'm going to give a few to you, and think those are up there, maybe not. But it'd be like, the plates on the vehicle have been reported stolen. The vehicle is an authorized emergency vehicle. The vehicle, ran the red light in order to yield to an emergency vehicle, or the vehicle was part of a funeral procession. These are exemptions, but they're not all encompassing. There's always gonna be circumstances. That's why we have somebody review the citations, to make sure that they are being properly, administered. So, the method of collection, if a citation is not paid, will include the city filing a municipal infraction and getting a judgment against the vehicle owner. Once we have a judgment, we may submit the judgment to the it's called the Iowa Offset Program, to withhold the fine, via whether it's a state tax refund or send out to a collection agency. These are last attempts, not something we would do initially. And obviously, we want to, first try to obtain just voluntary compliance. That is the goal. Also, I want everybody to know that all citations do not go on your driving record. This is a civil citation, okay? So moving from the ordinance more to the policy, as far as the ATE policy goes, no additions would be made to the policy without council approval. Now, what I'm talking about is the fixed locations, which I'll talk about in a couple slides here. The policy will add more depth to how we all administer the program as well. A mobile camera would be deployed only after 2 complaints or more were made to city officials. If this were the case and the unit was then deployed, there would be a 24-hour notice provided to the public via social media on where the unit would be positioned. So it would then be placed in this location for no more than 48 hours. Okay, so again, it gives people a heads up. We're not trying to fool anybody. We want people to not run red lights. We want people to slow down. That's what they're for. Okay. I think Ryan kind of mentioned this earlier, so I'm saying it again. The city manager, I believe, designates the use of any revenues. I'm sure that would be in conjunction with you all, but which I think is right now we're looking at public safety as well as the Civil Rights Commission grants to assist them. So statistics from the ATE program will be provided to the council in the monthly reports that you all get now. The policy sets a 6-month review timetable. So again, kind of like I think was done with the ATV ordinance. I think it lets us look at it going forward. Is it working? Is it not working? What do we have for statistics? Those kind of things. And it lets us look at the program as a whole. It just kind of sets that timeline so that we know, hey, okay, it's 6 months. Let's look at what it's done and what it's doing. The ATE policy empowers a police department commander to rescind citations per the ordinance or as deemed appropriate. So like I had stated earlier, after observing either one of the listed exemptions or some other mitigating circumstance, the ticket can be voided by an administrator who would be in charge of the program. Or he can bring it to the chief or I, and we can always help make a decision as well. So as far as the ATE locations go, as far as the ATE locations go, right now we're looking at Highway 151 and 13 and Highway 100 East Post Road. I think you were all informed that we actually, I think it was Gatso did some numbers for us out there, and we actually sat out there ourselves as well. I actually personally sat out at East Post and 100, and it was a little bit eye-opening. But then as far as the mobile speed camera goes, again, we will require 2 or more complaints prior to deployment, and location will be put on social media 24 hours in advance, so people will know where it's at. Again, it's not to fool anybody, so it should never appear that way. And then there is a listing of the fines. Again, this is very similar to what Cedar Rapids has for a fine schedule. Fines for speeding are as indicated, and then red light fines would be $100. So. Any questions?
Go ahead, Grant, and then Steve.
So I'm glad you ended on this, slide regarding the fines. If I recall correctly, my concern is that our initial draft didn't, conform or, align well with Cedar Rapids and others. It seems like you've addressed that concern in this case, which is great because then there's not a differential in fine structure between us and Cedar Rapids that's of any material difference. The only other question I have is the notification, I think, of the mobile unit based on 2 complaints, I think is what is being proposed. Right now, if a resident calls up and says, oh, Irish Drive is now a drag strip at certain times of the day, do we give notification before placing an officer out there to observe?
We do not.
I'm just, it seems to me, I wouldn't be naturally inclined to provide advance notice to this, but given some of the concerns that have been registered with us, I think this is going above and beyond to give people fair notice that we are observing in this automated means. So I'm not against that. I just think it's an interesting distinction. Current practice would be no notification for surveillance. And in this case, we are. And again, I think it's an over and above consideration to those that might have a concern.
And I think the only difference to that, Councilman Harper, would be that with a mobile camera there, it'd be for a longer period of time than an officer could ever sit there. So that might, again, I think it's just kind of giving people a heads up is kind of the idea. And now you know it's there. We put it out there. You have no reason to be speeding. You know it's there.
Chad, do you, with the mobile speed sign, do you put notice out to the public that that's going out? I know it's not giving a ticket or anything, but no.
Yeah, some people are not on social media, so some of us would not even know about that being out there. My comment.
That's very valid.
Yeah, yeah. So, my comment is about the mobile speed cameras will be deployed after 2 or more complaints. I think 2 complaints is a pretty low threshold. You could have a situation where you have 2 neighbors that think that's a high-speed area, or they're concerned about it. And I'm not sure that warrants our police department setting that mobile unit out there. Maybe the wording of that should be changed a little bit to, I don't know, I came up with multiple and repetitive complaints, where if you get a couple 1 month and a couple of months later, you get another one, or it's repetitive or multiple times. But I mean, I think two is kind of on the low side for consideration of deploying that out there. So just my comment.
Fair statement.
Is there anyone who doesn't agree with that? That the 2 was too low? All right, go ahead.
I was just gonna agree with that. And then also, I think the way it's written, it could be the same person complaining. I could call today and I could call tomorrow, and then
Right.
suddenly you have to put it out there.
It could.
So I don't know if we want to put that into consideration.
And that part is a little tricky because it could also be in the same situation that Mr. Jensen stated. It could be someone complains and they complain 2 days later and 4 days later and 6 days later. It's still repetitive. So that's kind of a tricky little guide there. Something we probably need to think about, yeah.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
I got 4 questions written down. For the, yeah, I know, 4. Like Grant over here. The equipment, is there an RF, whatever, PQ, QU, whatever that is? Is there one of those that's gonna go out for a company, or you already have a company?
Right now, there's one vendor we're looking at. Actually, the other vendor did not get back to us, but that may be something we have to do before we implement everything.
Okay. Has there been thought or talk of first offense be a warning?
Not to my knowledge.
No?
Not to my
Is that something that potentially, I don't know if anybody else would be on board with that, but just the thought, warnings issued? would it be? I don't know.
I'm just being straightforward and honest with you. I've never heard of anything like that being done with these types.
On any of them? No.
Mm.
With the company that would supply the cameras, is it I know you talked about a review every 6 months. Is it a contract that you sign where they're in place for a year or 2 years or whatnot, or do we not know that yet?
I believe, don't quote me, but I believe it's as long as we want it. If we decide not to use it anymore, then they would just take their equipment and go.
Even 6 months in, we could say, nope, we're done,
I
we don't
believe
like
so.
it.
I believe so.
Take
There's
them out.
no fee, there's no cost to us for them to let us use the equipment.
Okay. And then the 2 locations that you've got, has there been talk of at least red light cameras? Because that's what I'm more in favor of than the speed camera. Other locations, and I bring that up because every day I'm at a stoplight and I see somebody run a stoplight the other direction. Every day.
Yeah,
So-
and that's something, Councilman Brandt, that's why it's stated in here that anything that's affixed, like, I think they put these on a pole, I'm not 100% sure. But anything that would be of concern would have to go through council for approval first. We're not just gonna throw them up wherever we want. That's not gonna be up to us. That's not our discretion.
So how would that just be, I guess, more of a Ryan question then? If 2 months from now, we're like, yeah, these are great, we should probably put them up on South 31st, 100 and.
It could be, I mean, with anything, it could be a number of, the starting point could originate with council. We could get a number of, complaints from residents that would cause us to evaluate that intersection, much like we do with TAC, some of those TAC requests. I would be challenging our team to, as we're trying to be more proactive on things. So if we see trends, bringing it forward to the council and say, hey, this is a trend that we're seeing, and have that dialogue with council and get input. So it could be a number of avenues that it starts from.
I thought of another question too, so I got 5. So wherever the cameras are at, there'll be a sign that says photo enforced or whatever the sign says. Can you put those up in other locations when there's not actually a camera there to try and deter?
I'm gonna look this way.
Well,
I don't know.
especially like if you've got one at East Post and 100, can they be all along 100? Because it's photo enforced at that one spot, but how far out do you have to put it? Do you have to put it 100 yards? You have to put it half a mile? I mean, could have multiple and then.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we would defer to our engineers on the placement of the signs. I will say this, that having driven through a community just recently that has them, the communities will have those signs at the entry points into their community. So the photo enforced is not necessarily where the camera is, it's into the community, letting them know where it is. But that's something that we can look at.
Kara's got some, huh?
I believe that the current case law dictates a minimum requirement for signage, but I don't know that it speaks to the maximum. So I would have to take a look at that. And then we would also have the safety and visibility concerns that Mike would know far more about than I do.
Sure. Yeah, if they're added to a speed limit sign, it's not taking up any more space, right?
Not necessarily, but it could become a point where people start ignoring them too. If they're not following the speed limit sign, they may not follow the
Not
enforced
getting a
by
ticket or
camera.
something, yeah. Okay. I think that's all my questions for now. Thanks. I took up a lot of time.
Anyone else? Okay, so
You were about to ask about direction. Is that accurate?
that's
All right,
right.
well, thank you, Mayor. One of the things that, appreciate the feedback on the policy. There's one thing that I alluded to, during an earlier item. I just want to point out that when the packet was published originally, the policy had, the language in there that the city manager would dictate where the funds would go. I was out of the office when I got back, was reviewing these, and what we've done is we've uploaded alternative language, so I want to read that so it's clear. Any revenues generated from enforcement will be dedicated to public safety needs. Revenues may also be used for any grant programs administered by the Civil Rights Commission. We wanted to propose that because the Civil Rights Commission administers a grant every year. And Leanne might have to correct me if I'm misstating this, but that grant program has been funded by an LMI set aside. LMI is low to moderate income, and that is established when you have a residential TIF. So it's a law that you have to set aside a portion of the increment for the LMI set aside, and then that could be used as grants. So that's how we've been funding that program. That funding now has been depleted. So in order to keep that going, we thought that it was an acceptable proposal to have any revenue that's generated help fund that grant program. So that's the rationale behind that. Wanted to call it out, see if council's got any feedback on that.
Go ahead.
Would that only go towards that civil rights grant, or would it be anything that's low to moderate income that potentially the city might do in the future?
This is a policy, so we'd have the discretion to dedicate it to anything that the civil rights, any program that they're doing. Obviously, any.
I don't mean civil rights program. I mean something that's low to moderate income program in the future. So not just the civil rights.
It could be. I mean, if that's something that council wants to entertain, we can tweak the language to address the desire that you have there. But right now, as it's written, it's meant to provide the funding for the existing program that we have.
Ryan, if I could add to that. To speak kind of to your review question earlier, Will, you asked about how we would come about bringing this forward in the future. The policy currently provides for a 6-month review of the ordinance. And while the ordinance takes 3 readings, the policy only takes 1 resolution to make a change. So if in the future we no longer needed to use those funds for those grants, or we had generated enough funds where we wanted to use it for something else, we can amend the policy at any time as well.
So the ordinance designates where the funds are going to be used, but, right?
The policy does.
Policy does.
Yes.
Okay, and the actual deployment of those funds then would be a council decision or city manager decision?
It's council
Council.
decision.
Okay.
It would be done as part of the budget process. We would
Okay.
call it out and identify for council how those funds are being allocated.
Anyone else?
Somewhat of a follow-up from the first presentation on this and Will's comment about the notion of providing a warning. For the 2 fixed locations that we're talking about, Highway 100 and east-west, and then 13 and Highway 100. I just looked back at the stats that were provided. In round numbers, 40% of the east-west bound traffic on Highway 100, 40% was greater than 65 miles an hour. And in the other case, Highway 13, 25% north-south was greater than 65 miles per hour. So on that basis, given the severity of violation there, at least in those areas, I wouldn't be at all, interested in issuing a warning until we start seeing a higher degree of legal compliance. The only other, well, I think that was really the principal item that was on my mind. I just think that if we start off and have a rigor about this and learn from it, then we can decide how we want to calibrate our utilization at those 6-month intervals as you gain data. So
I agree.
Go ahead.
If there's no further questions or comments from council, we do have a question. And it pertains to, most of the commentary that we've heard has been, the feedback that we've received today has been about the policy itself. The ordinance we've talked about, we've incorporated the changes. We haven't heard any feedback on the ordinance. As Kara just mentioned, the ordinance takes 3 readings. So the question for the council is council comfortable with putting this on for first consideration on Thursday? And then during the 3 readings, staff will go back and massage the language in the policy and share it with the council during that, and then bring it back April 13th. If council does say yes, April 13th would be the 3rd reading. Policy only needs the resolution, which is 1 reading. So we could work on the language and have it coincide with the 3rd reading of the ordinance. But I read, okay. 20th, sorry, my math's wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
You're good, Steve? Anyone else?
No concerns here.
No objections? Okay.
Okay, so then the first reading of the ordinance would be on Thursday's council agenda. We'll work on massaging the language based on the feedback that we heard from the council on the deployment of the mobile unit.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, Jeff. All right, moving on to the review of the agenda for Thursday. No items are marked on page 1 and on page 2 through A6. Any questions on those? Okay, A7, Leanne?
Thank you. I actually have Michael Maloney on to present on this item A7, the road use tax revenue loan agreement. And it was provided in your packet, but for the purposes of this discussion, I am going to hand out those road use cash flow models that were attached to the memo.
Hey, Leanne, do you want me to just fire away or do you want to add
I
anything
actually-
before we get started?
Go ahead, Michael. I actually just got back to the microphone. I figured you're waiting for a cue.
No worries. Cool. So, hi folks, good to visit with you here today. We're going to be talking specifically about the road use tax financing. That is a component in the first financing component of the public services facility. This is building on the discussion I had with this group in early November when we went through the public hearing process, and city staff has been working very diligently over the last several months, along with the budget process and the CIP review as we refined this. Because it's a lot of words and numbers from here on out, we thought we'd start with a nice graphic on slide 2. Ryan Waller, that's 1 in the box here for you. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we reviewed this overall process with council in November. Well, we've done some work on the project bidding, analyzing project costs and allocations, as we'll review further today. I want to talk a little bit about the timeline that's been completed to date and the follow through for council's action meeting on Thursday and beyond. So we did hold those public hearings at the end of last calendar year, authorizing the borrowings for a road use tax, sanitary sewer, and solid waste portions. In March, we had the rebid project packages, which allowed us to finalize the sizing of the overall project and finalize in the last couple of weeks the allocation strategy we'll be sharing with you today. In preparation for the financing, city staff has been working with Davidson and your bond attorney Dorsey and Whitney to help prepare the offering document on the road use tax financing. That was provided to Moody's Investor Service, and we had the rating call with Leanne and Brian last week, the results of which we'll receive tomorrow. With that in place, with the review today of the financing plan, the action on Thursday would authorize and approve the use of the preliminary official statement. That's the offering document for the road use tax financing, and allow Davidson to go and market the bonds to potential investors in the coming weeks and bring back those results to be memorialized in a bond purchase agreement on April 6th. And then we'll close as planned later in April. Want to just pause here, make sure everyone's aware of the steps before we get into the details. Leanne, also that everybody can hear me okay.
We're still hearing you fine, Michael.
Cool, let's roll the 4. So I mentioned that city staff has worked diligently, and we're going to get into this in terms of the road use tax cash flow that Leanne just passed out. But it was important in that review to focus on long-term sustainability and the other needs beyond the public service facility for each of the funds. What we did was twofold. After running through a number of scenarios, we landed on what's in front of you here, which is a 30% allocation to each of the road use tax, sewer, and solid waste portions. That's little changed on the sewer and solid waste sides. Road use tax is less than what was presented late last year, and then the addition of a modest portion to be paid from stormwater revenues. That's really there to offset the total costs. Because we didn't include stormwater in the discussion of public hearing amounts late last year, if that ends up being where we land later this year, we'll come back for future hearing authority. Let's go to slide 5. So here's the why, and some of this information has been shared with you. We've got that additional detail in front of you today, but just at a high level to refresh everybody from November, the road use tax fund is based on an administration of revenues from the state. So that allocation is paid monthly. And while we get a per capita estimate usually on a multi-year basis, typically we've outperformed. And then from a long-term perspective, as you're aware, not only did we have the 2020 census, but between 2010 and 2020, there was a special census of this for the city as well. And then we saw statewide funding also increase on a per capita basis in fiscal 16. Right now, we're expected to receive around 5.4 million, and that's growing modestly over the next few years. In short, a little over 100 million expected over the next 20 years based on this value. So right now, the only debt on the stream would be the 2020 bank loan that's outstanding. The idea here is, while debt gets paid first in terms of perspective from investors or bondholders, the city obviously has needs specific to the road department in terms of not just staff, but operations and other capital projects that we want to make sure we preserve that overall cash flow. It's not just about repaying the debt, it's about those other needs. And the allocation that we've landed on is to ensure that we've got sufficiency over the long term, considering not just the debt, but the holistic approach to the fund. Let's go to slide 6. So here's a few of our assumptions as we walk through, and this is really to summarize the detail from the cash flow model. We have per capita projections through fiscal 27 from the state. That's as far out as the horizon goes, and we've kept it flat thereafter. Right now, we have our debt service payments structured to use about $700,000. I think we ended up a little bit less than that in the latest revaluation on the model. And that's all related to the public services facility. We've conservatively estimated operating expenses growing 5% annually, building from the current fiscal 24 projected budgeted values. I think one of the pieces to note, obviously, the employee benefits being offset in the road use tax fund by special revenue levy proceeds. Nothing else is changing from a transfer standpoint, and we're obviously using the latest and greatest on capital projects and capital replacement considerations. The big goal here was to maintain a healthy fund balance. So we targeted 2 million over the long term. And with that, what we did was we structured the bonds and the allocations accordingly to make sure we accommodate that. I'm really looking at 5 to 6 year projection here with the best information that we have available. You know, I mentioned the special census between 2010 and 2020. I think not just for the reason of additional per capita distributions on the road use tax fund, but other benefits. I would imagine it will likely be a situation where the city would hold another special census at some time between now and 2030. I'll leave that for another day and another discussion. But our big picture approach from a debt standpoint is that we'd structure this debt accordingly with the 2030 balloon payment on the 2020 notes, that once we get to 2030 or approach that time, we can see where the road use tax performance has been, where our population is, where our needs are, and give ourselves an ability to refinance, reamortize, restructure, what have you, payments for 2030 and beyond. We need to do that anyway with the balloon payment on the old note. This way we can have everything aligned and take one bite at the apple to look at this and obviously continue to update as we go forward. A lot of content there. I'm going to continue to move ahead and then we'll circle back with questions if that's all right with the group. Let's move to slide 7.
Thanks. Well, are there any questions before we move on? Just to, okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yep, you bet. So that's on the road use tax side. I don't know, Leanne, if you want me to go into the other allocations here, or if you want to go into the detail on the cash flow before we move on to 7 and beyond. Kind of your call here. Just wanted to be mindful of everyone's time and the best approach from your perspective.
I would suggest cash flow, and then these other ones will just be quick hits.
Perfect. Let's do that. All right. So a lot of numbers. What I'm going to be doing is referring to the columns by fiscal year, and I will be referring to the rows by the numbers that you can see just in from the title on each line on the left-hand side of the page. So let's talk from a big picture standpoint here. This is incorporating all of the assumptions that I just reviewed on the previous 2 slides, but we're going to start on the top row there. You'll notice in blue, it starts with $128.50 in fiscal 23 and moves from there. Those are the prescribed projected Department of Revenue estimates for your per capita distributions. So very simply, we're taking those monthly distributions per capita, our annual distributions per capita, and multiplying that times our population to derive the revenues coming in for the fund. The next piece is debt service. I know it seems a little bit goofy from a cash flow perspective to cover debt first, but under the way the state code works and how the pledge will work on the bonds, debt gets paid first. So we are analyzing that such that the debt service payments are approximately $700,000 a year through fiscal 29. And that does mean that even at the 30% allocation, we're looking at a interest-only structure on these new bonds over the next several years. Again, 2030, not pictured, would be a time for us to reevaluate, reamortize, restructure, refinance, what you will, on the 2020 and 2023 debt for that purpose. Kind of the top line element, and the big key here is what's left in line 9. That's available after debt service. That's the money that you're having to apply to your operating costs, future capital, and rainy day set-asides. I'm going to just pause right there before we get into some of the operating expense assumptions and the bottom line, and just, Leanne, if there's anything I should recover, and then 2, if there's anything from council in terms of questions before we keep on moving along.
I don't have anything to add on that part.
Questions? Okay.
So we're going to go to the next tier, and that's in the light blue shading in the middle of the screen. Lines 10 through 23 are operating expenses. So these are the rolled up categories from the city's budget and internal financial reports. We'll note we've got the fiscal 23 kind of budget re-estimated figure in the middle, and then the fiscal 24 projected budget numbers there. I know that it maybe seems like those numbers are relatively similar and consistent. I will tell you that staff has done a tremendous job going through this with a fine-tooth comb and reviewing those costs, really getting a good handle on what they see as demonstrated needs. I know that'll continue to be refined in the future. That being said, on a go-forward basis, you'll notice the 5% operating expense placeholders. Now, it's not just to cover inflationary considerations, but just want to be conservative there from an expense side. especially under current circumstances. So that's what's in here, and that's the assumption that we referenced previously in the slide deck. As we move farther down through the plan of finance, overall, this is including the standard transfers we've seen before, including the coverage of the employee benefits for the road use personnel from the special revenue levy coming in. That's kind of the big line item in 27. Then our capital projects, road use fund, road use replacement, tied to the latest version of the CIP in lines 31 and 32. Accounting for all revenues, expenses, and debt and transfers, we've got that net change in cash and balance. And as you can see, really we're talking about sort of a modest drag on cash balances over the projection 25 through 29. I think that's in part or in whole in some years from our conservative operating expense considerations. But with some of the unknowns that we face, we think it's good to be conservative from this standpoint. And the long term was targeting that our ending fund balances, again, long-term target of 2 million. We don't creep below that threshold under this projection until fiscal 29. So our focus was the budget year and the next 5 years for our structure and allocation to make sure we continue doing the things that we need to do from the road use tax fund while afford the debt for this portion of the public service facility. We have identified 2030 as a key year for addressing how to repay the balance of that debt, but we'll have a lot more information at that time, the performance of the fund, road use tax distributions, etc. The one thing I would add here, and this is by no means a decision point for today, is that at that point, the city could also consider, depending on debt capacity constraints, other growth variables, etc., switching some of this debt from road use tax debt to GO bonds at that time. I think this is something Leanne either has addressed previously or in some of the communication with the packet, but wanted to make sure that was pointed out as well. I appreciate after a long meeting, everyone wants to dig deeply into a cash flow that's not tied to Excel, but with that in mind, just wanted to open this up to any questions. Obviously, Leanne, if there's anything I missed to start with before turning over to council.
I do want to point out a couple of things, and Kim, feel free to supplement if I say anything wrong, but as we were diving into the numbers and looking at where that cash balance was going to land, as he had mentioned, we were targeting the 2 million in fund balance, and we were trying to target a positive net position. To help us get there in this process, there were 2 capital improvement project changes that we made. One was the elimination of the traffic signal program. I think we'd identified with the direction we've been going with the capital improvement program. We've actually been naming specific intersections as separate projects in the plan. And those funds a lot of times were not being utilized. So we felt like that wasn't a major impact. The other one was moving $1 million for the HMA project from road use tax to general obligation bond. Michael could allude to what impact that actually makes. But that was 2 changes we made to help with that fund balance. So questions, if council has any questions.
Questions? Steve, go ahead.
Just an accounting question on line 18. I just do not recall on, which is the street lighting. We had a new number jump in there for fiscal year 23, 406,000. Can you just remind all of us what that big change was for?
If you recall, at the time, those were being charged against the general fund, and it is a permissible use of road use tax. And also at that particular point in time, we were not utilizing the employee benefits levy to the extent that that was permissible for the road use tax fund.
Okay, I remember that. Thanks for the reminder. Thank you.
Anyone else?
With that, let's pop back to the slides. And rather than getting the nitty gritty today on their cash flows, I'm providing a summary for each of the sanitary sewer, solid waste, and stormwater funds. Let's consider this the speed round, as it were. The good news is for sanitary sewer and for solid waste, we went in a deep dive with council late last spring and then in the summer, respectively. So let's talk about some of the hard work that staff and council did last year and where that leaves us today. So with the sanitary sewer fund, the difference here with these utility funds, right, is that the city now has the control over rate setting. You know, we don't have control over the revenue stream on the road use tax side like we do for the city's utilities. So that being said, we visited last year about appropriate rate setting. And when we did so, we knew we had some additional projects to address, including the public service facility. But we also had the unknown of the Cedar Rapids kind of treatment payments that were out there. I think that's been discussed, that we had some positive feedback for the city in terms of a go forward basis. And because of that, our outlook for fiscal 23 and beyond is far more favorable on an operating expense side. The only debt outstanding for that fund is also the 2020 bank loan related to the original public service financing. But even adding in the new payments that we're projecting for the 30% allocation here, as alluded to earlier in the presentation, we believe that no additional sewer rate adjustments are going to be required for that debt issuance. Now, that doesn't mean that's a set it and forget it forever. I think we've talked about in the past, the best practice is to make sure we've got some modest cost of living type adjustments to address future system needs that we know we'll have. And that's going to be, you know, part of those Cedar Rapids discussions that have been ongoing with previous council meetings. So those are on the horizon. I think the key for today is that there's no specific additional sewer rate adjustments related to public service financing on the radar, but we will circle back to this when the time comes for the sanitary sewer issuance. Let's move over to slide 8 on solid waste. Similarly, last year we visited on the solid waste rate adjustments. There's some structuring considerations that we can come back to on the allocation, but the short story is with both the 2020 existing debt and the planned solid waste issuance, we believe that the city could issue that debt with no additional solid waste rate adjustments. Again, I'm going to reiterate, it's always probably a good idea to stay in step and keep moving those adjustments to keep with pace with inflation and operating costs. But I think the big decision point, or the big catalyst for some additional decision points, will be when we get the solid waste study. So that process I know is ongoing, but wrapping in the near future. Some of the feedback from that solid waste study would be incorporated in the next turn of the solid waste analysis for additional rate setting. But again, the conclusion is we can issue the solid waste portion of the debt for the public service facility with no additional solid waste rate adjustment. Let's move to slide 9. This is the new one on stormwater. So on the stormwater fund, we've subsequently created a stormwater utility cash flow. In this case, it's a smaller utility fund of the city. There is no outstanding stormwater debt. We're talking about, just based on historical performance for fiscal 23, projected net revenues for debt of about $430,000 a year. And we'd be talking about leveraging about half of that net revenue stream for debt service payments. Based on that scale of financing and the current performance of the fund, that would not require additional stormwater rate adjustments to be able to issue that debt. And like a broken record, I'll mention for the third time, for any utility, it's best practice to have modest inflationary adjustments. So the stormwater master plan that I think is starting to come underway, that project is going to have recommendations for ongoing needs, capital and otherwise for the system. That'll be a discussion for another day on those rate adjustments, but specific again to the public services facility project, no additional adjustments on the stormwater fund to afford the expected debt based on the allocations presented. Let's go to slide 10, then we can work on wrapping up here for folks. So what are the next steps? Again, this is consistent in terms of action items that were presented back in November. This is after we wrap the road use tax financing that'll be addressed at the next 2 council sessions. We'll go through the same process, getting the offering document together with city staff and Dorsey and Whitney. We'll have rating calls for those as we get those prepped to move forward. Assuming we move forward on the stormwater portion, we'd have that public hearing process. Whether we do these concurrently or stagger them will be based on the cash flow for the project, but the concept remains the same, that towards the end of the fiscal year, we'll be approving offering documents and finalizing rates, terms on pricing, with closing expected no earlier than the beginning of next fiscal year in July for at least the first series, or perhaps the first 2 in the summertime. So more coming to you. This road use tax portion is the first, as indicated back in November. We're just executing the plan that was previously outlined. A lot for me today, plenty to digest. Leanne or staff, if there's any more to add, please shoot away. And council, obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I think the only thing that I would add is obviously all of these models are work in progress. We're going to continue to get more information and continue to make these models better. One thing that I didn't mention that did come to mind as Michael was talking, in the road use model line 32, which is road use replacement, we did outline in the budget, I already mentioned it on the general fund side. That is a number we are not at this particular point confident in. We are continuing to do analysis on what that dollar amount should be. I just want to make sure council was brought along in that as well.
My last comment is just, the city staff put a lot of time into this. I don't, that may not get communicated to council, but specifically Leanne, Brian, Ryan Miller, and Kim put a ton of time, ton of back and forth with me and others on this. And I just want to make sure that's noted to council here.
Thank you. Okay, questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Michael, you mentioned this solid waste study, I think, completion. Ryan, is there a projected date for that, just so we know when we'll see the outcome of that?
Yeah, we just visited with SCS today, actually. And so we're gonna meet with city administration, be Leanne, Ryan, and Kim here. We're targeting either the last week of March or the first week of April. All of our preliminary models have been completed, the modules. And so from there, we're gonna put together kind of the initial take for city council, the information we're gonna start sharing. And then from that point, we're gonna start citizen input and then keep going with that project. And so I'm gonna say you could see something last meeting in April or the first meeting in May, depending on what direction we have with the modules.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I mean, everybody out there doesn't get to see the same worksheet that we have in front of us. And I just want to let everybody know it does show a very high level of sophistication and work and effort by everybody involved. So I think the information now being used in the manner and how we're making some of these major decisions is vastly different and much better than it used to be. So it's a reflection upon the direction that the city is making, and Leanne and Michael, we appreciate everybody working on that.
Thank you.
Mike isn't on. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to the staff for all the work. Anything further on this item? No? Okay. Leanne, you have the next one also?
Are you getting tired of me yet? Kind of a
Leanne
big
show
finance
today,
meeting.
Before we get to the Barcelo show, it's Leanne.
Not tonight. Tonight it's the finance show. And, I'm sure you've already noticed Mike Esker sitting, waiting very patiently in the back. This is his item. Braveheart Development, had submitted an application for additional incentive for the hotel project, the Holiday Inn and Suites. This is a project out at Easttown Crossing. Bring up a map there for you. So that parcel in particular we're talking about is blue. The request that they made was actually for hotel motel tax, but as hotel motel tax is one of the most flexible revenue sources that we have into the city, staff discussion was that we really want to maintain that agreement with utilizing tax increment finance. In order to do that, we would need to look and open up the entire amended development agreement that covered the entire site. And since we're already doing that, we figured we'd take the opportunity to simplify it. So this was originally approved in 2017, updated in 2021. In order to prevent continued amendments of this now twice amended development agreement, if you approve it in a few weeks, we've decided to split it into 3 agreements. So one agreement will be the development agreement, what was the original, only we're going to exclude these 4 lots that are highlighted. the blue one for the hotel, and then the other three are the three lots that are not yet have identified projects moving forward and placing them under a memorandum of understanding. I'm gonna pause briefly and see if you have questions on that before I actually show the next slide, because it is an extremely complicated agreement. We've gone back and forth both with DA Davidson, Mike Esker, and our staff team to kind of really get into the detail.
Before you proceed, I'm turning over the meeting to the mayor pro tem for this. Thanks.
And again, Mike Esker is here, so if you have questions about the development or the status of anything, he can provide update.
Questions that anybody has? Leanne, just for general orientation, can you characterize the difference between the blue and the red elements of this? How they're different and being treated within this, again, just at a high level?
So the blue is going to be the hotel development agreement. The three red highlighted parcels are going to be what we refer to as unbuilt lots. But essentially, it's three lots we're removing from the original amended development agreement because the projects have not yet been brought forward and moved forward as far as buildings constructed. The rest of them all are underway or have already been built.
Thank you. Anybody else, any questions? Randy?
I have a question on when we say undeveloped lots, the bottom right one does have retail establishments on it. Are we talking about overlaying what's currently there as well?
You will need to come up to the mic.
Thanks, Mike, for joining us. If you could just identify yourself for the record and then
So I'm Mike Esker with Squaw Creek, formerly Squaw Creek Crossing, also now known as Easttown Crossing. So what we're doing here through the discussion is trying to separate the lots that are already built, basically have a building on it. So the scooters or the Daisy's garage, so those are already built, it doesn't show it in this. And then we're going to try to kind of close that off, basically. Okay. And then we've got the hotel as a separate agreement. And then the three, what we call unbuilt lots are the red ones there. That make sense? So everything is built basically other than the red and the blue.
okay. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm with Randy though. Doesn't that lower right red one have scooters on it already? Like there's already something built.
You can see my pointer. Scooters is actually
Okay.
in this parcel down here.
Okay.
And I
thank
believe
you.
it's Daisy's garage, right? That's
Correct.
here.
Yep, right there. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Did that answer your question? Perfect.
Okay. Any other questions on this part of it? Okay, Leanne, back to you.
I would say the only other part that's not built is this third apartment building. That is still under the development agreement. However, we did simplify the payment structure for that. So rather than originally the development agreement had 3 different payment phases on that lot. So when I say 3 different payment phases, that means each one of the 3 buildings would receive a 12-year incentive on a sliding scale. We've decided to simplify it in our negotiation where it's 1 payment phase and it's starting next fiscal year. So depending on the timing of that third apartment building, or if it never occurs, they just receive the 12 years and that's it. When I say 12 years, let me caveat that by saying it will be up to 20 years if the hotel is built. And this is how we're making up that increment so that we can provide that additional 1.5 million for the hotel. So this kind of splits out the 3 agreements. Every time I say this, I get lost in the detail and it's overwhelming, even trying to communicate it. So I apologize for that. It just really is that complicated of an agreement. So this kind of summarizes on the amended agreement, it reduces the incentive from 9.6 million to 7.5 million. but extends the incentive from 12 years to 20 years at 50% if the hotel is built. If the hotel is not built, they get the 12-year sliding scale as was in the original agreement. I'm going to pause, see if you're following. Then for the hotel agreement, we're providing up to a maximum of 1.5 million in tax increment finance. There is no hotel motel in this agreement, 90% incentive for 5 years and a 50% incentive for 5 years. And then the memorandum of understanding includes those 3 unbuilt lots with the terms right now laid out as of what was in the original development agreement, and that's the 12-year sliding scale. And then the maximum 2.1 million we put in there to get to the original 9.6. That doesn't mean it will be that, because after a memorandum of understanding, in order for those projects to move forward, we would have to amend the urban renewal plan once projects come forward and negotiate those development agreements. Overall, this does 2 great things. One, we no longer have to amend that development, that very complicated development agreement going forward. It simplifies it. We don't have to worry about the phasing anymore. The first time we amended that development agreement was because of timing. Approved in 2017, COVID happened, derecho happened. And then furthermore, it keeps us out of that hotel motel game. So no hotel motel incentive. I think I've talked enough tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's number one, it's very unusual for us to talk about a TIF with a 20-year timeline. We typically cap it off at 10 years. This at 12 years was probably beyond the normal. So are we having to go out to 20 years because of the build out time of everything else that is not part of that shaded area took longer than expected, or the value was different and therefore has taken a longer period of time to use the TIF to provide the incentive that was talked about in the original agreement?
It's essentially making up for the 1.5 million in tax increment finance, because under the original development agreement, East Town Crossing would have received a 12-year sliding scale.
Okay.
This $1.5 million request was intended to be on top of that. And so that the developer still receives the money that was intended for the infrastructure that was underground and all the grading and all of the work that has already been occurred. This $1.5 million agreement, the intent is to eventually assign that to whatever hotel provider. Right now, that's Holiday Inn and Suites.
And Leanne too, this also ties into the hotel motel tax. So the original agreement contemplated hotel motel tax towards something that's not generating hotel motel tax. That hotel motel tax money is used to support other organizations around the community. So the TIF, the increment is actually picking up that share. So we're able to take the hotel motel tax and keep it based in the community instead of depleting that to put some towards something that's not generating hotel motel tax yet.
Steve did that.
Well, the 2.1 down below in the MOU of the 3 lots is taking the 2.1 from the 9.6 to the 7.5, right? So that's being pieced out from there. And so the 1.5 in TIF for the hotel, that's something that is just being added.
This is the additional, yes.
That we're adding that on top of it just to make sure we're getting a hotel out there.
And that was because a request came in.
Yeah.
So that's what started this whole process. And so when we got the request, this was several months ago, we got the request, we sat down, tried to dissect the original agreement, and it was just too convoluted. I mean, everybody around the table couldn't understand it. And so we tried to parse it out, simplify it, and then just, if it's in TIF, just keep it in TIF, free up those hotel motel tax dollars.
And by going out to 20 years for the TIF for the amended, that's just simply, it's not changing the overall incentive for that portion. It's just giving them more time to recover that.
Correct.
Okay.
Randy, you've got a
Fine.
question?
I do. You know, we've been talking about this location of the hotel for so many years. It's it's kind of becoming background noise. What do we have put in here for a timeline for a go or no go?
We have January 1, 2026 as the certification date.
Oh. Thank you.
I think, Will, Sarah, any questions on this? Maybe I'm going to, in a more rudimentary way, ask the same question Randy just asked. But I'm going to maybe hopefully simplify this for the record or not. So what's the probability of the hotel being built as we're sitting here today?
I'll invite Mike Esker forward
I-
again to answer that question.
Because there's the big, there's the operator if in the amendment here. And so what's the probability that it'll be built?
We struggle with that because what's the probability interest rates are going to stay where they're at? And that's one of the challenges. What's the probability COVID's going to happen again? That's been one of the struggles we've had. But I think you explained it basically, Steve. Hey, the 9.6 is what we agreed to previously. That's going to be there. This is a little extra because the hospitality industry has been hit really hard. You all know. I mean, the past few years. So COVID was crushing for the hospital and it's slowly coming back. And so that's, who predicted that coming, right? So right now, we've actually hired somebody else and I brought Mitch in to really push this project along. We've got the Hart Group pretty excited about it, feeling better about the hospitality industry. I think there's some data about the hospitality industry, but it's still coming back, right? Interest rates have gone up, prices have gone up, a lot of things have changed. We're pushing pretty hard to get this done starting this fall. But depending on financing, banks, where rates are at, what the economy does, how many more banks collapse, it may be next year. It's about an 18-month build. So if if you start in 24, it gets done in 25, as Leanne said, a 2026 certification.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Mike?
By the way, so the financing is part of that. So prices have gone up. So what was going to cost us 12 is now 17 million. So the capital, bank capital and equity capital we need about 5-6 million capital.
So on that, is this for the hotel? Sorry to fixate on that, but that seems to be kind of a hot spot, and I think we all know how much people have wanted one there. But so you would sell that? Are you looking for someone to come in? You're not looking to be the owner operator, just bringing.
It's not our area of expertise. We have a hotel partner, the Hart Hospitality Group, that would partner, but basically we're gonna basically sell that to them. Sell the property. They're gonna be the operator. They're gonna be the developer of it. We've got some local boots on the ground to help push things along a little bit, both for this and the whole project out there. But yeah, so there's going to be a different hospitality partner. So basically the money for all the investors, they're going to be investing in this, including some from Marion, your friends and family maybe, that are going to be part of this project. We're going to transfer that tip over to them. So whoever invests in that project is going to get that.
And is Hart Hospitality Group local?
They're in Iowa, but they're based basically out of the Omaha area, Council Bluffs.
Okay, and then are they licensed to do specifically Holiday Inn Express and Suites, or do they have license to work with other, if this wouldn't work, can they go to another brand, or are they just
No, so
specifically
we've
with-
already got that all approved. IHG has approved it. This
Okay,
has been approved by IHG. We probably spent $100,000 on this already to buy the license for the Holiday Inn Express. They've approved this site. So we're on board. They're on board with us. This site has been approved by IHG, the corporate, parent for Holiday Inn. So there's no other brands planned. This is what's been approved by council 2 or 3 years ago when we were here. The site plan's been approved. This design's been approved. So this is what we're going forward with.
so it's just really about the costs
It's really about the money,
right now.
just raising the money. Yep.
Yeah.
So.
Anything else? Will?
So Leanne, so the original is getting amended down to 7.5 to add that 1 point, well, no, for the 2.1 down there, and adding the extra 1.5. What happens with that parcel if, because there's an if in there, there's no hotel and something else gets built there, like a strip mall or something? Does that incentive still go with that parcel, or is that's only for if it's a hotel? So this would go away and then you have to do a new agreement for something else if there is no hotel.
So this is specifically a hotel development agreement. The development agreement includes even a reference to the site plan that's been approved. So it is the hotel, or they would be submitting a different
Yep,
request
and
that
it's-
council would have to consider.
This hotel you're looking at
Um,
right there.
And the reason why, again,
This would be
it was
wrong.
strategic to say, we're just going to extend the incentive beyond the 12 years to 20 years. Because that gives us time to make sure the hotel is actually built and just tax it on the end. Which is great for us from a time value of money. Not as great for them, but
That all
it
makes
was a
sense. I just
concession.
Didn't know if what happens if, because the if is in there, if there is no hotel.
If there's no hotel built, they get the original incentive of the 12-year sliding scale on the parcels that actually have the building and the infrastructure to provide the
And
increment.
then just start over fresh on that parcel.
And that's kind of, that's also the beauty of the MOUs, is that it allows the council to have that ultimate discretion at the end of the day. So if it doesn't materialize, it's got to come back, development agreement, agreement is not developed in the manner that's done, then
Yeah, the MOU for the 3 unbuilt lots, we still gotta come back in front of you
Yeah.
with a plan and design and what we're gonna be doing with those 3. And hopefully we're gonna, again, Mitch is here to help push that along too. We're hoping to get that activity, and we want this probably worse than you do, actually. We really do. I mean, it'd be a good thing out there, it'd be a good thing for the community. I mean, obviously, you know, the time value money of the TIF for the hotel is $400,000 or $500,000. I mean, the town place suites, I think, got $3 or $4 million on the front end of that. So as a comparison, and we're $5 million more cost. So if you do the math, I mean, it's good. And we're gonna, obviously, we think on the front end, it's critical. That's why the total plan is important. Plus, we pull out the hotel motel tax. That was a pretty big chunk of it. And so we offset, you all are offsetting some of that with this additional TIF.
So the development agreements are simplified. We're maximizing the hotel motel tax back into the community. And we're providing the council, the city with protection to ensure that the things that were guaranteed to be built are being built. I mean, we had the conversation with Mike a couple weeks ago about making sure that there's a reference to that, the hotel, the Holiday Inn. So if that's not what's being constructed, well, guess what? You got to come back to council, make sure that it meets what your expectations are. So we've accomplished quite a bit through this effort. Leanne has done a tremendous job with this, and Mike and his team have been exceptional to work with.
Anything else? Leanne, thanks to you for your work that you put in on this. I guess it's a simplification, so thank you. Thank you. All right. I think we're back to the mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have the city manager on the next
Hi,
item.
council. We've previously had conversations about ARPA, the ARPA dollars, or ARPA allocation. We worked with council on approving this template of a spend down plan for the ARPA allocation. One of the things that we've had conversations with you all about impacted industry. And one of those impacted industry is tourism, Prospect Meadows. And we've been in conversation with Prospect Meadows for quite some time. So what's on your agenda is a resolution for your consideration to earmark $500,000 of our ARPA allocation towards Prospect Meadows. We have an existing economic agreement with them that has some obligations for the city. So what we're proposing is take that, have that spend down a portion of our allocation as it qualifies as impacted industry. So this is the plan that you previously approved. Let me go back really quick. We did want to present an alternative plan with Prospect Meadows, but given the direction that we got on the transit service in there, you can see was $240,000. Because of the direction that we received not to pursue that, we do have timeframes, so hence the revised plan that we wanted to present to you. You can see in the yellow, that's the Prospect Meadows, which would then leave $730,000 left of the ARPA dollars towards the housing. We will come before you in the near future with a proposal for the remaining $730,000. But for the purpose of the action on Thursday's agenda, it would be to approve a resolution amending the agreement that we have with Prospect Meadows and allocating that $500,000 of the ARPA dollars.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. The remainder of page 4 and page 5, no items are marked. Are there any questions? Okay, next item for discussion would be on page 6, E14. Mike?
Yes, so this is the project calendar for our pavement management program this year. So similar to previous years where we go in and do specific patches and then diamond grind, so it's nice and smooth when we're done. These are the streets that we're looking at: 20th Avenue, Indian Creek to 35th, 8th Avenue, 13th to 22nd. Engineer's estimate of just under 1.4 million. Bids would be on April 11th with a late start date of August 14th. And 55 working days and $1,000 per day and per working day of liquidated damages.
Questions? Go ahead.
Mike, this is the same treatment that you gave to 35th last year?
Yep.
That turned out real nice, by the way. My Mustang loved it. Where's Chad?
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Colette. Oh, Steve. No? Oh. Okay.
All right, the next item then is also part of our pavement management program. This is the 10th Avenue resurfacing or Business 151. This will be from 35th Street where we've done our intersection improvements out to 13. And this is the south lanes or eastbound only. So we'll do that section this year. And then the plan is then followed up in future years with that amount. The engineer's estimate is just under 1.5 million. Bids on the same day as late start date of 7/31/23 with 55 working days and $1,000 per day in liquidated damages.
Okay, questions? Yes, Steve.
Yeah, what is going to be the manner of resurfacing? Is just tearing it off and putting new asphalt down?
Yeah, so it'll be our typical HMA program.
Yeah.
Where we're gonna mill the existing asphalt off. And where we have our bad joints, we're gonna have to do some joint repairs. So
Okay.
some will be partial depth patches, full depth patches.
And then just put a layer of asphalt over it?
Yep.
Okay, and then, so the westbound would be done next fiscal year?
Hopefully the next fiscal year, assuming budget is approved.
Yeah, I get a lot of comments on that section, so it'd be good to do that.
Okay, other questions? All right. Any questions on section F under community development? F1 through 4? Otherwise, we'll go to F5. Hi, Kesha.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Kesha Billings with the Planning Department, and I'd like to discuss a request that was brought forward to staff, and I advised the property owner that he would ultimately need to make the request to Mayor and City Council to get it received and filed. There was an attached email to your packet that was directed to the mayor, ultimately going to all of you. So the request is to sever or de-annex, approximately 11.66 acres at the corner of Highway 13 and Big Springs Road. In your packet, I had kind of a zoomed out image, so it's far northeast Marion. And so essentially in the request from the property owner, the taxes were going up, and looking at the services as noted in the packet, the services, there's no water, there's no sewer, there's no pedestrian access to this part of town. The closest park I think is 2 miles I measured. It's a gravel road maintained by the county and whatnot. And so there are limited city services currently, and a significant extension of the sewer line would need to be accommodate any type of services out here. And we don't foresee that happening in the near or the distant future. So with this, the property requested to be severed is in red. And then there's a property to the north of it, about 37 acres. And then the property to the east of it is 19 acres. So the ag property totals 56 acres. So state code does not allow property to be severed or annexed that would otherwise create an island, right? And so by severing this property in the red, these two properties would be created as an island. I have talked to both of the property owners surrounding to the north and to the east. They have not gotten final answers back to me yet. Both didn't seem opposed to it. But what I'm looking for is council direction. Is this something before I would go into drafting any type of agreement with the property owners or seeking additional concurrence with wanting to sever? I'd like some council direction. One more thing before feedback is staff would also recommend getting an annexation, some sort of memorandum of agreement with the property owners when they sever, that at such time the city requests they would be a voluntary petition back into the city. So it's typical for any subdivisions within our 2-mile review is that we request that to have that for a later date. Not that we would expect it here anytime soon. Questions?
At any time, the city would see that as beneficial, that they wouldn't contest that.
Correct.
Okay. Questions, go ahead.
So would that be on the property? So that would, if the property sells, it would stay with the property, correct? Okay.
With the limited service, with the request, would council like staff to proceed continuing to bring this back as a official matter?
My sense was that staff thinks that it makes sense. So, I mean, I personally don't have an objection, but go ahead.
Yeah, so just as a bit of history, I think in the 2005 timeframe, this and some other properties were either annexed in this case or attempted to be annexed, which was a tactical measure relative to landfill expansion. That resulted, there was some contention around that activity. That resulted in a settlement agreement between us and the landfill that put some terms and provisions around their go forward activities. We addressed that probably about 1.5 years ago, and the landfill has, as we now know, is not expanding. They're looking for alternate means to handle the load of waste production in the county. So the originating necessity of this has evaporated, I think is the safe way to say it. And as Kesha said, we're not really providing any services or infrastructure out there, and in the absence of a compelling development drive out in that immediate neighborhood, I certainly, on that composite basis, think this is a good idea.
So since that was brought up, is there anything in that settlement with the landfill that would make these properties have to stay in city limits?
Based on my review, Will, and I'm reaching back in memory, but no. the settlement agreement would put terms and conditions on the existing site development and looking for alternative waste diversion. So there wasn't anything that
Nothing to do with
extended to this.
Just making sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kesha. Okay, for the next section, on the abstention calendar, nothing is marked. If there are any questions, I'll have Mayor Pro Tem handle that. Any questions on those?
Okay. All right, back to you.
On page 8, items A1 and A2 are not marked. Any questions? Okay, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Your Honor and Council. So on the agenda, we have a proposed resolution approving the wastewater capacity agreement. This is the same agreement that both Cedar Rapids and Marion staff presented on the last work session. So in accordance with this agreement, over the next 20 years, Marion would be allotted the capacity, wastewater treatment capacity for 61,000 residents, or what we call a residency equivalent population. This would not take effect until 2027. With that, are 2 improvements that Marion would be accountable for at the WPC facility. The first one is the solids handling improvements. That project in total is estimated at $250 million. Marion's proportionate or capital portion of that is estimated at $24.5 million, and that would be paid back over 20 years. Again, that is an estimate. We will not know the actual cost of that until the bids are received. But 2027 is the projected date in which that improvement would be completed. The second improvement is the main lift improvement. That one's down the line. That's projected to be completed in 2034. Total project cost for that is $130 million. Again, that's an estimate. Marion's capital portion of that would be $15.9 million. Again, that payment as well would go over a 20-year period starting in 2034. So staff, after all the hard work we've done with Cedar Rapids staff and Marion staff, we are recommending approval of this agreement. The next steps is that we are working on revising the current operation and maintenance agreement. That kind of allows us to determine what our annual rates are, and we're hoping to have that done this year by December 2023. We got quite a ways to go on that, but that is our goal. So, any questions?
Questions for Ryan? Okay.
All right.
Thank
Thank you, sir.
Okay, the next item is under public safety.
Hello again.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Okay, so this go around, I'm gonna speak with you all about a proposed change to Marion City Ordinance 69.12, which as stated on the slide will be 313-10.12, related to private property and towing. Part of what we're looking to do here is we want to transfer responsibility and thus liability for private property tows from the police department to the property owners. Under the current ordinance, the PD has to facilitate towing cars, and we're required to, we have them sign a hold harmless agreement by the property owner, leasee, or the person responsible for the property, but we still do all the paperwork. We do a full report, we do a tow sheet. There's a lot more work that goes into it for something that I just don't know if we need to be involved in. This ordinance change was written with rights of both the property and the vehicle owners in mind, while at the same time removing the police department from, like I said, business we probably don't need to be a part of. Under this proposal then, a vehicle can be towed by a property owner, leasee, or person responsible for the property only if, and I'm gonna give you a few circumstances, it is a private residence, so a driveway, which would be the immediate grounds for a vehicle to be towed, or emergency circumstances, such as a business where a car is blocking access to their building or loading zone or blocking in other vehicles. Again, that would require an immediate tow and could be an immediate tow. Notice is placed on the vehicle's windshield 8 hours in advance, or vehicle is parked for 24 hours or more regardless of notice, or lot is marked at all entrances, no parking, private lot violators will be towed at the owner's expense. Sign also has to include tow company, and they use their phone number, and their phone number has to be on it too, so that people would know if their vehicle did get towed, they would know who to call. Vehicles would be required to be towed to a storage facility within Lynn County. And again, this would prevent any unnecessary fees or travel for people. We don't want, somebody from, not singling any city out, but Clinton or wherever coming in to tow a vehicle and taking it to Clinton. That doesn't seem quite fair. So we want to make sure that that's addressed initially, so. What would the police involvement still be? There would still be some. Tow driver would be responsible to notify the PD with the license plate, the VIN number, a vehicle description, and property owner who's authorizing the tow. So who actually wants to tow it, just can't be somebody random. This ensures that vehicle is not stolen or wanted in connection with any type of police matter. And then it ensures a record exists if a car is reported stolen or towed illegally, because we don't, obviously, we're not in support of that at all either. So this does free up our officers. These are, again, as I stated a couple times earlier, these are calls we just don't know that we need to be a part of. This is more of a private matter between a business and who's ever parking in their lot. We just kind of wanted to, put parameters on it so there still is some guidance there. We would still be notified. And we also think that this is gonna help with the parking, some of the parking issues in the uptown district too. Again, as long as it's labeled and everything's followed with the new proposal that we have, we think it'll help with that too, so. Any questions?
Makes sense as a matter of principle, as you said. Just out of curiosity, what's the frequency of those types of calls?
Last year we towed 41 private,
41.
41.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be irrelevant. I was just curious. So can it be immediate? Like, how fast does it take to tow somebody's car from there? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you pulled into the private thing, they're like, oh, that car doesn't belong here. They're towing them right
It could
away.
be immediate in certain circumstances, but not all. And we have to actually, if it's a private property tow and we're involved, and that's kind of part of the thing I'm talking about, we actually mark it and we don't tow it for 24 hours if the lot's not properly marked. This would allow the property owners to notify through something on the windshield, where it could be lesser time and they could get it towed if they didn't have the signage in their lot to begin with.
Because if you're in the uptown and you need something towed and somebody parked there and you really don't want people there, it could be something where you need it done in immediate, 30 minutes, hour. I mean, 24 hours is probably hasn't even served some of the purposes sometime, right?
Right.
And then when they have to call the police, when they have to notify the police department prior to towing, so they just call in and it's just like a take note of it and go, it isn't.
Yep, and we would still put it as an incident in our CAD system. So we would still have all the information. We would have record of who called, what time, what car, plate, all that stuff I mentioned, the VIN, all that information, make sure it's not related to anything criminal. And then it would be from there. And I mean, it's a civil matter regardless, but again, it's just something that, do we really need to be involved in? I know when we were looking through some things and some of the ordinance and some of our own policies, Chief Kitzmiller actually asked me, why do we do this? And I said, because we always have. And it's just something that we're busy enough. Calls are going up, officers are down. It's one of those things we just don't need to be doing.
And are the tow, so, I don't know, the app you're not supposed to watch because they're spying on you. an incident where tow truck drivers were into a confrontation with somebody they were towing. Are tow companies okay with something? Does this create more chance for a confrontation that they're dealing with or not?
Not necessarily, and quite honestly, if that were to occur, then they need to call us. I mean, they can still contact us if there's any type of problem or anything, and we would, at that time, we'd be glad to assist them. But it's just something initially, we don't think that we need to be a part of, especially some of these vehicles that we end up towing, they've been sitting there for a week.
Really?
And it's like, okay, why are we being called? And then we end up doing a bunch of paperwork that doesn't even involve us, so.
I appreciate y'all looking at efficiencies and different ways that these can be handled
Right.
better.
Brian.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Along those lines, Councilwoman, when this is done, one of the things that we're gonna be working on is issuing an RFP for towing services. That's something that we haven't done before, so we'll be able to do that, and that will be a contract that we will manage more closely instead of having kind of the Wild West.
So obviously this pertains to private property and towing. Can you explain to the council when, say someone's parked illegally on a street, like in a no parking zone or a temporary no parking zone, what happens in those situations? And can vehicles be towed right away?
Not typically, because we can issue a citation for no parking violation. Usually, again, they're either tagged for 24 or 48 hours. I can't remember which one it is. But usually it's not immediate unless it's some type of road hazard or some other circumstance is evident. Then if we had reason to, I'll put it that way, then we could definitely do that.
So that was a trick question.
I think I know where he's going.
Yeah, so the follow-up is pertaining to festivals or where we've got temporary posted signs for no parking. So chapter 70.6 gives us the authority to tow in violation of those posted signs. And the chief has changed the internal policy from shall seek to notify to may seek to notify. So that way we can clear the street in advance of festivals, which I think is where you were going with that question. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Knott, I have a couple quick questions here. One is, can you tell us, is this the practice of our other communities as well too? So we just are full of that knowledge? I mean, is this? It is.
I don't have direct knowledge, but the chief and I have had conversations.
Okay. And then a second question, because I've had this question come up several times, and it's a ridiculous one, but I'm going to ask it. If a property owner chooses to physically remove that vehicle off of their private property and place it back on either the right of way or back into the street, can you tell me, is there any criminal activity there? I guess I look at that, I have talked that one down 100 times with people, but yet I guess if I physically want to put my gas grill on Will's yard, that homeowner may choose to remove it themselves. I look at the vehicle as being the same way, but can you just give us a very high level as to how that would be looked at?
I've honestly never seen that. I don't know why, in all honesty, someone would take it from the position it was in and put it on a street because you're gonna pay for the toll regardless. But criminal, I don't know about criminal. What would probably happen is because it went onto the street, we would then have to mark it for 48 hours. So it would be causing us, again, more work, and I imagine there would probably be a conversation. But that's not appropriate, not necessarily criminal, but probably not appropriate to remove a vehicle just from your private property and put it on public property. Would not be something that's probably too kosher. And I suppose until we started seeing something like that, at that point, we'd have to address it.
Sure, no, and I appreciate that. And I don't think it would have been a traditional tow job, removing the vehicle off their private property onto the street. It would be more of a pickup and a tow strap. is what this gentleman was alluding to, and I certainly discouraged that type of practice, but some commercial property owners take their parking lots very seriously, so.
So, and where I will say where they run the risk, I mean, not only they face a civil liability, but if they damage the vehicle in the process of doing something like that,
Right,
then you might be looking at a criminal mischief or something of a
Right.
charge like that.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry to digress off
No,
onto that
you're
short
good.
little story, but
You're good.
those have come up before, so I was just curious. Thank you.
Your Honor.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Just on the scenario that Randy presented, I do have a kind of a secondary question. Would that require an F-250 pickup or bigger?
Thank you. The remainder of page 8 is not marked for discussion. Any questions on those items? The parts and under engineering, sorry. All right, E7.
Yes, Your Honor. So on Thursday, we will have a public hearing regarding this project. So what this was fixing some of the curb and gutter and median treatments to add salt strips, similar to what we have on Barklow Boulevard, as some council members call it, to spruce those areas up. As we put that together, the estimates came in much higher than we had anticipated for that project. So we're actually going to recommend that these bids are rejected. So we do write this in a positive fashion. So either Rachel will put a note on there to vote no. We will have to work with the Parks Department to reevaluate this, restructure it, rebid it, and come back with a different project that maybe limits it to certain categories, to get it a project that's within budget.
Questions? Yep, go ahead.
I know the recommendation, but what is it? Like, what is the project?
So, similar to Sixth Avenue, it's adding like the black salt strips, pieces of concrete on the edges. It's putting boulders. It's sprucing up the landscaping that's there. The problem is we only had 2 bidders, and because it was complex and the amount of the size of the project, how diversified it was, it's just something where we're gonna have to pare it down. Maybe we only do the salt strips for one contractor, just because it's such a small project. So that's something we'll have to value engineer and figure out how we do that. It's still an important project. We just need to break it up so that it's within budget so we can get it built.
These are the medians over by Linn-Mar on 10th Avenue and then 29th Avenue. For a long time, we've had some bushes there. They've died over time. And currently, the only thing that's really living is coneflowers, which is, so we've always had issues with the vegetation and then just maintenance of it.
Is it the whole, like, is it just that intersection or is it the whole, it's the whole road?
It's the
So
whole.
there's sections
it's the
along
whole strip.
29th Avenue between the bridge and then there's
Yeah.
also sections along 10th Street that were
Yep.
part as the stimulus project.
Yep.
So all those medians in there.
All those. Okay, thanks.
So we'll have to look at whether we pare it down or just structure it a different way, but we'll have to figure out a different way to bid that.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Item 8, E8 is not marked. Any questions on that? I guess that's the same one. That's E7. All right, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you all.